Elon Musk stood in his office, staring out at the sprawling Tesla factory below. The hum of activity below him a constant reminder of how far his company had come. As the founder and CEO, he had shaped Tesla into one of the most innovative and successful companies in the world. Yet, something gnawed at him. Despite the accolades, the billions in market value, and the constant rush of innovation, he felt distant from the very people who made Tesla what it was. For years, Elon had been in the boardrooms, making decisions that affected thousands, if not millions. He'd been flying in private jets, attending press conferences, and managing a global empire from his high-tech office. He knew the numbers, the models, and the grand vision of the company. But did he truly understand what was happening on the ground? Did he understand the frustrations, the exhaustion, the hopes, and the dreams of his employees? What would it be like to work on the floor? To be just another worker, clocking in and out, doing the work that actually makes Tesla run? The thought had crossed his mind many times before, but today, something was different. He had just finished a call with a group of investors, discussing the latest quarterly earnings, and for the first time, he felt the disconnect more acutely than ever. These investors didn't care about the people in the factory, they cared about profits, stock prices, and quarterly returns. But what about the people who made Tesla run? What about the workers? He paced the floor, his thoughts racing. Maybe it was time to do something radical, something unexpected, something no one would ever see coming. I'll go undercover. The idea hit him like a lightning bolt. What if he went to work as a regular employee at Tesla's factory? No one would know it was him, just an average worker trying to navigate the challenges and pressures that everyone else faced. For once, he would see Tesla not as the CEO, but as an employee. He would hear firsthand what people really thought about the company, its leadership, and its future. He could learn the truth in a way that no boardroom meeting or investor call could ever reveal. What happens when the CEO becomes just another employee? What could possibly go wrong? Elon laughed to himself. The idea was bold, even reckless, but it felt right. It was a chance to break through the glass walls of the corporate world and experience Tesla as it truly was, not through the polished lens of his status. This wouldn't just be an undercover mission for the sake of gathering data. This would be a test of his leadership, his humility, and his ability to connect with those who made everything possible. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized just how risky this idea was. What if it backfired? What if employees hated him for the secrecy? What if they discovered who he was and turned on him, feeling betrayed by his deception? Still, the allure of understanding his company from the inside out was too powerful to ignore. "I'll do it," he muttered to himself, feeling a surge of determination. Elon quickly made the necessary arrangements. He would take on a completely different persona. No one would know him as the CEO of Tesla. He would work anonymously, just another face among the hundreds of employees who worked in the heart of the factory. He'd even adopt a fake name and a fabricated backstory to ensure his cover remained intact. He couldn't help but smile at the absurdity of the situation. A billionaire CEO, working as a factory employee. What could be more ironic? As he prepared for the journey ahead, he made one final decision. This wouldn't just be a short-term experiment. He was going to dive deep into the daily life of his employees and learn things that would shape the future of Tesla, whether it was easy to hear or not. And so, the plan was set in motion. The next morning, Elon stepped into the Tesla factory, his heart racing with both excitement and a touch of nervousness. He had no idea what to expect. He had always been in control, always the one calling the shots. Now, he would be just another worker. He pulled on his Tesla-branded work shirt, his fake name badge clipped to his chest, and took a deep breath. As he walked through the bustling factory, the noise, the movement, the machines, everything felt foreign. The air was thick with the scent of metal and grease, and the hum of production was constant, almost deafening. This was a world he had rarely visited, at least, not as a participant. This was where the real work was done. He approached the group of workers who were assembling parts for a new vehicle, trying to act casual, but his mind was racing. He had no idea how to blend in or what his coworkers would think of him. He could feel their eyes on him, judging him, as they looked at his unfamiliar face. "Hey, you're new here, huh?" One of the workers, a burly man named Tom, asked. His voice was gruff but curious. Elon nodded, trying to sound as normal as possible. Yeah, just started today. Name's Dan. I'm here to help out. Tom raised an eyebrow. You don't look like the usual kind of guy who'd work here. Elon forced a smile. What does that mean? He thought, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he just nodded. He'd learned that people often judged others by appearance, and he didn't want to make it awkward. All right, Dan, Tom said, tossing him a set of safety goggles. Get to work. Let's see what you got. Elon's first few hours were filled with mundane tasks, sorting parts, helping with assembly, and trying his best to keep up with the rapid pace. But it wasn't the work that stood out. It was the way people interacted. The jaded looks, the murmurs, the way workers seemed to have resigned themselves to the grind. But then, something unexpected happened. At lunch, Elon overheard a conversation between two workers at the break table. They were talking about the latest production delays and the pressure to meet deadlines. The conversation shifted to leadership, and one of the workers casually dropped a line that made Elon's stomach drop. You know, it's funny. You never see the higher-ups around here. I bet they're all sitting pretty in their big offices while we're down here busting our asses to make things happen. Elon's heart pounded in his chest. He knew they were talking about him, even if they didn't know it. He didn't know what to say, so he stayed quiet, pretending to eat his lunch, but his mind was racing. What did they really think of him? Did they resent him? Did they hate him? His undercover mission had only just begun, and already, the reality of working on the factory floor felt much harsher than he could have imagined. This is going to be more difficult than I thought, he mused, his thoughts heavy with the weight of what he'd heard. But it also made him more determined. He had to do this. If he was going to make Tesla the company he envisioned, he needed to know the truth. And the truth, he suspected, was far more complicated than anyone could have guessed. What would you do if you found out your boss was working undercover? Would you be impressed or upset? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Elon stood in front of the full-length mirror in his small, nondescript apartment, staring at his reflection. The man staring back at him was hardly recognizable. His real identity, the billionaire CEO of Tesla, the tech mogul, the inventor, was gone. In its place was a man with a nondescript appearance, wearing a standard-issue Tesla work shirt, jeans, and a name tag that read Dan Mitchell. Dan Mitchell. Just another guy trying to make a living, Elon thought, the absurdity of it all striking him once again. But he knew this was the only way. No one would ever see the real him coming. The name, Dan Mitchell, had been carefully chosen. He wanted something common, nothing too flashy, but something that could easily blend into the sea of employees working at Tesla. His new identity was grounded in mediocrity, designed to prevent suspicion. There was no room for mistakes. If he was going to learn anything real, anything of value, he needed to stay under the radar. Elon had arranged everything in secret, his cover story, his daily schedule, and even a small, one-bedroom apartment a few miles away from the Tesla factory. He made sure to sign up for the night shifts, knowing that the fewer people on the floor, the easier it would be to blend in without drawing attention. He had practiced his fake identity for days, studying every possible aspect of Dan Mitchell, so that he could pull off the ruse. He even had a fabricated backstory. Dan was a 30-year-old guy who had recently moved to California from the Midwest, looking for a fresh start in the automotive industry. He had worked in warehouses before and figured Tesla was his big break. The story was simple enough to be believable, but detailed enough to avoid any awkward questions. For the first time in years, Elon felt nervous. He wasn't used to being the newcomer, the outsider. He had always been the one calling the shots, not the one following instructions. This was uncharted territory. He picked up his fake Tesla ID badge and clipped it to his shirt, making sure it was positioned just right. The name, Dan Mitchell, was now official, even if only on a piece of plastic. He took a deep breath and exited the apartment. The next morning, Elon arrived at the Tesla factory, parking in the employee lot as he tried to shake off the nerves. He looked around at the sea of cars, the ones that belonged to workers just like him now, not to the boss. It was surreal. These were people who clocked in and out, day after day, with no real knowledge of who he truly was. The anonymity was both thrilling and unsettling. He entered the factory and checked in at the employee entrance, his badge flashing red on the security scanner, confirming his new identity. As he walked into the massive building, the noise of the assembly lines and machines enveloped him. There were workers everywhere, focused on their tasks, moving quickly, almost robotically. The atmosphere was tense, charged with the sense of urgency that had driven Tesla's growth. But Elon felt like an outsider here, and for the first time, he was acutely aware of it. He wasn't used to walking this slowly, this anonymously. He had no meetings to rush to, no boardroom to sit in. For the first time in years, he had to put in the work, just like everyone else. "Hey, you're new, huh?" A voice snapped him out of his thoughts. Elon turned to see a short, muscular man with a greased-up jumpsuit and a clipboard in his hand. He had the look of someone who had worked at Tesla for years, practical, no nonsense. Elon smiled and nodded. "Yeah, first day. I'm Dan Mitchell," he said, forcing a casual tone. The man looked him up and down, sizing him up. "All right, Dan. You're with me today. I'll show you the ropes," the worker said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Name's Jake. We'll be installing seats on the Model 3 today. You ever done anything like this before?" Elon hesitated for a moment before answering, "Yeah, I've done some assembly line work before. I can handle it." Jake raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "We'll see about that." Elon followed Jake down the line, feeling the weight of his new persona. He was no longer the brilliant tech leader with all the answers. He was just another guy, trying to fit in, trying to avoid making any mistakes. As they approached the workstation, Elon was handed a pair of gloves and a safety mask. It was all part of the process. His task for the day was simple: attach the seats to the car's frame. But as simple as the task seemed, it required precision, something that would be difficult for Elon, who was used to thinking on a grand scale, not doing the nitty-gritty manual labor. "All right, you just gotta make sure the bolts are tight. No loose seats on this line," Jake explained, showing Elon how to properly fasten the bolts. Elon nodded, trying his best to appear competent. He hadn't done manual labor like this in years, and he was quickly reminded of how difficult and tiring the work could be. The factory floor was hot and noisy, the air thick with the sound of machines and the hum of workers moving in sync. Everyone was focused on their tasks, not giving much attention to the newcomer, just the way Elon hoped it would be. But it wasn't long before the cracks started to show. As the hours dragged on, Elon found himself struggling to keep up. He wasn't used to the physical demands of the job. His hands were sore, his back aching, and his mind kept drifting back to the life he used to lead. He tried to mask his frustration, but there was no escaping the reality. He wasn't a worker. He wasn't part of this world, at least not anymore. Jake noticed his struggles, but he didn't say anything. He just kept working, paying little attention to the billionaire who was slowly realizing just how much he had been removed from the realities of the workforce. Every time Elon made a mistake, it was met with a shrug or an eye roll from the other workers. "This is harder than I thought," Elon thought, his frustration building with each passing minute. "Maybe I should have started somewhere easier. Maybe I should have stuck with the office for just a little longer." Lunchtime came, and Elon found himself walking to the break area with the other workers. It was a small, crowded room, with long tables and a coffee machine that had seen better days. The workers seemed to gravitate toward their usual spots, as if following an unspoken social order. He sat down at a table, quietly unwrapping his sandwich. The noise in the room was constant. People chatting, laughing, complaining about their shifts, and gossiping about their coworkers. But Elon couldn't focus on the conversation. Instead, he was lost in his thoughts, thinking about how little he truly knew about these people. One of the workers, a middle-aged man named Brian, looked up from his sandwich and eyed Elon curiously. "Hey, you're the new guy, right?" he asked, his tone casual but sharp. Elon nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just started today." Brian squinted at him. "You sure don't look like someone who'd work here. What did you do before this?" Elon hesitated, unsure how to respond without blowing his cover. "Oh, some stuff. Worked in warehouses before. Just looking for something different." Brian nodded, but there was something in his gaze, something skeptical. He leaned back in his chair, staring at Elon for a few seconds longer than was comfortable. They say you can tell a lot about a guy by the way he eats his lunch. You're eating like you've never had to work a day in your life, Brian said, chuckling to himself. Elon froze, the comment hitting harder than he expected. He was used to people looking up to him, to people admiring his success. But here, he was just another worker, and they weren't impressed. They weren't intimidated by his title or his fame. They didn't care who he was. Maybe this was a mistake, Elon thought, but he quickly brushed the thought away. No, he couldn't afford to give up now. He had to see this through. Elon's second day on the factory floor felt like a strange mix of déjà vu and fresh frustration. The morning passed in a blur of factory noise, the rhythmic pounding of machinery, and the constant hum of workers focused on their tasks. Elon, or rather Dan Mitchell, was beginning to settle into a routine, but it was becoming clear how alien this life was to him. Yesterday, he'd been overwhelmed by the sheer physicality of the work. The repetitive motions of screwing in bolts and fastening seats to the frames of the Model 3s left his hands sore and his mind restless. It was nothing like the high-level strategic thinking he was used to. Every task required constant focus, and the hours seemed to drag on in a haze of exhaustion. Today, though, was different. As the shift progressed, Elon found himself more determined to adapt, but there was something else in the air. He couldn't put his finger on it. Something had shifted. He was no longer just a newcomer. He was starting to feel the pressure that came with being part of the machine. Just another cog, indistinguishable from the rest. And yet, as he moved through the factory, he noticed how the workers around him seemed to give him odd looks. There was something unsettling about it. Eyes glancing over at him with suspicion. He had assumed that, as the days went by, people would get used to him and simply see him as another worker. But that didn't seem to be happening. Instead, he felt like the odd one out, an outsider trying too hard to fit in. That afternoon, he was assigned to work with a woman named Sarah, who had been with Tesla for nearly 5 years. She had a reputation on the factory floor as a hardworking, no-nonsense type who wasn't easily impressed. Elon had been told she could teach him the ropes of the assembly process, but something about her seemed different from the others. When they met at the station, Sarah didn't even acknowledge him at first. She simply gestured to the tools on the table and started working. Pick up the wrench. We need to tighten these bolts on the doors. And remember, don't rush it. If you screw up, it can cause issues later down the line, she said in a voice that was almost too calm, too practiced. Elon nodded, trying to mask the sense of being watched, of being judged. Sarah worked quickly, efficiently, her hands moving like a well-oiled machine, each movement precise and purposeful. Elon struggled to keep up. He wasn't used to the pace. His hands felt clumsy, and his body wasn't conditioned to this kind of repetitive physical labor. His mind kept racing, distracted by the sound of distant voices and the faint whispers of people exchanging glances. "What's with you?" Sarah suddenly asked, without looking up from her work. Elon blinked. "What do you mean?" She paused for a moment, finally turning to meet his eyes. "You don't belong here." The words hit him like a punch to the stomach. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice tighter than he intended. She shrugged, her face unreadable. "You're trying too hard. I can tell you've never done this kind of work before. You're not cut out for it." Elon's mind raced. She knows. She knows something's off. But how? For a split second, his mind flashed back to the conversations he overheard yesterday at lunch. The workers joking, talking about how outsiders could never really understand the grind, how they could never appreciate the sacrifice. Sarah's words were more than just a simple observation. They felt like a judgment. It was as if she could see right through his carefully crafted persona. It wasn't just the fact that he was struggling with the tasks. It was something else. Something in the way he moved, the way he held himself. "You don't know anything about me," Elon replied, the words coming out sharper than he intended. He was trying to keep his cool, but the pressure was building. This wasn't supposed to happen. He was supposed to blend in, to gather information, to see what people really thought of him without them knowing who he was. Now, he was starting to feel the weight of his own deception. Sarah's eyes narrowed, but she didn't respond. Instead, she just continued working, each bolt turning with a satisfying click. The rest of the shift passed in silence. When the whistle blew at the end of the day, signaling the end of the shift. Elon left the assembly line feeling more drained than he had ever been in his entire career. His back ached, his hands were sore, and his mind was full of questions. As he walked back to the employee break room, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. There was a gnawing sensation, like an itch in the back of his mind. He couldn't pinpoint it, but he knew something had changed. It wasn't just that he was struggling with the work. It was that people were starting to see through him. And then, as he entered the break room, the strange looks continued. Workers were sitting around tables, their voices low as they spoke in hushed tones. The buzz of conversation seemed to die down when Elon entered, and for a brief moment, he felt the eyes of everyone in the room turn toward him. He tried to act natural, walking to the coffee machine to grab a cup, but the tension in the air was palpable. He could hear snippets of conversation, but no one was speaking directly to him. "Who is that guy?" one of the workers asked in a low voice. "Don't know. I've seen him around a couple times now, but he's always so quiet." Another voice joined in, this one tinged with suspicion. "I think he's some kind of corporate guy. You know, the ones who come down here to see if we're doing things right, make sure we're hitting numbers." Elon's stomach dropped. It wasn't the first time he'd heard similar comments. Yesterday, someone had jokingly asked if he was from corporate, but now, the suspicion seemed more real, more pronounced. As he made his way to the corner of the room, trying to escape the uncomfortable stares, he noticed one worker in particular, a tall man with a beard and a worn-out denim jacket, staring at him with an intensity that felt almost hostile. Elon made eye contact, and for a moment, it felt like the whole room had gone silent. The man slowly shook his head and muttered something under his breath, but loud enough for Elon to hear. "Corporate. They always think we don't know." Elon's heart sank. Was that it? Was his cover already blown? Later that evening, in the quiet of his apartment, Elon reflected on the day. How had this happened? He had planned every detail, studied every angle of his new identity, and yet it felt like he was being found out. There was no real way to avoid the truth now. The workers were starting to see him as an outsider, a corporate figure, perhaps, or worse, a fraud. But deep down, Elon knew something was more important than keeping his cover intact. He had to understand the truth about what was happening on the ground, at Tesla, with the people who were responsible for making his vision a reality. But how could he do that if they no longer trusted him? Elon woke up to the sound of his phone vibrating on the nightstand, the low hum of the device cutting through the quiet of his apartment. His eyes opened slowly, groggy from another restless night. It was 6 a.m., and his shift at Tesla was about to start again. For a moment, he considered staying in bed, pretending that none of this was happening. He could easily go back to being the world-renowned CEO, the genius behind the most valuable car company in the world. But that would mean giving up the experiment he had begun. And for all the discomfort, the confusion, and the doubt gnawing at him, he couldn't bring himself to do it. He pulled himself out of bed and slipped into his work clothes, the same ones from the day before. Jeans, work boots, and a plain Tesla shirt with Dan Mitchell stitched on the name tag. The identity was becoming more ingrained in him, but it didn't sit right. He didn't belong here. Not anymore. The factory was the same as it had been the day before. Loud, chaotic, and relentless. The hum of machinery and the repetitive clanking of tools were deafening, making it hard to focus on anything else. Elon tried to block out the sounds and get into the rhythm of things, but it was impossible to ignore the growing tension in the air. It was clear that something was shifting, not just within him, but around him. The workers, though polite, were still giving him strange looks. Some avoided eye contact entirely, while others whispered in hushed tones when they thought he wasn't paying attention. Every now and then, he caught someone staring at him with a mix of curiosity and suspicion, their eyes lingering a little too long. Today, however, something was different. Sarah, the woman who had called him out yesterday, didn't approach him like she had the day before. She didn't even acknowledge his presence. Instead, she was working with her usual efficiency, but there was a distance between them, a subtle shift in the air. It wasn't just that he was struggling with the work. It was that the workers were starting to see him differently, as if he didn't belong here. As the day wore on, Elon began to notice something else: cracks in the system. Little things that the average worker would overlook. Subtle signs of discontent, of rebellion that hadn't been there before. At lunch, Elon sat at the same table as yesterday, trying to blend in, but the conversation around him had a different tone. It was no longer the usual friendly banter. It was something darker, something tinged with frustration. "Did you hear about that new model they're pushing?" One worker, a man named Rob, asked, his voice low but urgent. "It's all just a damn show. They keep telling us we need to work harder, faster, but the truth is, they don't care about us. They just care about the numbers." Another worker, a woman named Rachel, nodded grimly. "Yeah, the pressure's unreal. They keep raising expectations. We're expected to do the work of 3 people now. It's not sustainable. But they don't care. They just want the cars out the door." Elon sat quietly, his stomach sinking as he listened. This wasn't the first time he had heard whispers of discontent among the workers, but hearing it so openly in the break room made it feel real. This wasn't just idle gossip. It was a reflection of a deeper issue. The company he had built, the one that had revolutionized the electric vehicle industry, was not just a well-oiled machine. It was a ticking time bomb. He had always prided himself on the culture at Tesla, on how they were a family, all working toward the same goal. But the cracks he was beginning to see told a different story. The pressure was building, and if it wasn't addressed, it could all come crashing down. That afternoon, Elon found himself working with Brian, the worker who had been openly skeptical of him the day before. Brian didn't mince words. He was blunt, honest, and didn't seem to care who Elon really was. "So, Dan, you gonna last long here? Or are you just a visitor?" Brian asked as they worked side by side. His voice was low, but there was a sharp edge to it. Elon hesitated before answering. "I'm just here to learn the ropes." Brian chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Learn the ropes, huh? Sure. They've got a few more ropes to tie you up with before they're done with you." Elon frowned, unsure how to respond. There was something about Brian's tone that suggested this wasn't just about the work. There was a deeper frustration that seemed to pulse beneath the surface, something that had been building for a while. "You know, things aren't as great as they make it sound at corporate," Brian continued, his voice growing more intense. "We're the ones who do the work, the real work, the ones who get our hands dirty, and they just sit in their ivory towers, expecting us to do more and more, with less and less. They think we're just numbers, just cogs in the machine." Elon was quiet for a long moment. He wanted to respond, to explain how much Tesla had done for its workers, how the company had pushed for innovation in ways no other company had. But the words caught in his throat. There was a truth in Brian's words that Elon couldn't deny. They think we're just numbers, just cogs in the machine. Was that how it really was? Had he, in his pursuit of innovation and growth, lost sight of the people who made it all possible? The ones on the factory floor, working tirelessly day in and day out? As the shift continued, Elon found himself lost in thought. The disconnect between the corporate world he had built and the reality of the factory floor was starting to become more evident. He had always believed that the workers were the backbone of the company, but now it felt like they were drowning in the very machine they had helped create. By the end of the day, Elon was exhausted, not just physically, but mentally. His mind kept racing, replaying the conversations he'd overheard, the things he had seen, the way the workers looked at him. There was no denying it. Something had to change, but what could he do? That night, as he sat alone in his small apartment, he found himself thinking back to the people who had made Tesla what it was. The workers, the engineers, the designers, the factory employees who poured their heart and soul into the company. Elon had always seen himself as a visionary, a leader who could see the future and push the world forward. But now, for the first time, he was seeing Tesla from a different perspective. He wasn't just the CEO. He was part of the team, the ones who were actually making the cars, the ones who were keeping the company alive. And he wasn't sure if they trusted him anymore. Elon's third day on the factory floor felt like it was slowly suffocating him. He had hoped the tension from the previous days would ease, that the workers might start seeing him as just another part of the team, but it hadn't happened. If anything, the divide was growing wider. By the time the first break of the day came, Elon had already overheard multiple conversations about management, and not in a positive light. The words corporate and profit-driven hung in the air like an unspoken accusation, and as much as he wanted to deny it, he could feel the truth in those words. The disconnect between the workers on the floor and the executives in the corporate offices was undeniable. What had started as whispers now felt like an undercurrent of unrest, a tide that had the potential to break. That afternoon, Elon was placed on a new task, one that had him working in a different part of the factory. This time, he was working with a man named Kyle, who had been with Tesla for 6 years. Kyle was known for being a bit of a loner, someone who didn't engage much in the social side of work, but was respected for his skill and knowledge. Kyle didn't greet Elon with the same suspicion as some of the others. Instead, he simply got straight to work, showing him how to attach the wiring for the Model 3's electrical system. "There's a rhythm to this job," Kyle said, his voice calm but firm. "You get in sync with the car, the machine. Once you're in the zone, it's almost like you're just another part of the system." Elon nodded, trying to focus. But even as he worked alongside Kyle, his mind kept drifting. The conversations from the break room, the intense look in Brian's eyes, and the whispers of dissatisfaction, none of it seemed to leave his mind. "What's it like here?" Elon asked, breaking the silence. Kyle didn't answer immediately, his focus entirely on the work in front of him. "What do you mean?" he finally said, his eyes flicking toward Elon. "You know, working at Tesla, what's the real deal? Is it as great as they make it sound?" Kyle's expression shifted ever so slightly. For a moment, he didn't seem to know how to answer. "You mean corporate? The folks at the top? They talk a big game, sure, but I'm not sure they really understand what it's like down here." "Up there," Kyle gestured vaguely, pointing toward the far-off offices above the factory floor. "They see numbers. They see production quotas. But down here, it's about getting the job done. And the pressure, it never stops." Elon didn't respond right away. He wanted to ask more, to dig deeper, but something held him back. There was a growing sense of unease, an awareness that any more probing could expose his true identity. What if Kyle already suspected who he was? Instead, he just nodded, continuing his work in silence. But the words lingered. "Up there, they see numbers. Down here, we see people." As the day wore on, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to snap. Every glance he received, every word exchanged between the workers, felt loaded with meaning. It was like they were all waiting for something to happen. Around mid-afternoon, Elon had to take a short break to clear his head. The noise of the factory was overwhelming, and the exhaustion was starting to creep in. As he walked down the hallway toward the break room, he passed a group of workers gathered by a small window. They were huddled together, speaking in low tones. Elon's instincts told him to keep walking, to avoid drawing attention to himself. But as he passed, one of the workers, Rob, the man from lunch the day before, caught his eye. "You know, the problem with this place," Rob said casually, "is that they've turned it into a factory instead of a community. There's no heart here anymore, just deadlines and machines." Elon stopped in his tracks. His heart raced. It wasn't the first time he'd heard something like this, but Rob's words were more direct, more personal. It felt like the kind of thing people only say when they're about to do something drastic. "What do you mean?" Elon asked, trying to sound casual, though his voice betrayed his nervousness. Rob glanced around before leaning in closer. "You know what I mean. People are fed up. Management doesn't listen to us. They just push and push, like we're robots or something. And they think we don't know it. They act like they're doing us a favor by giving us a paycheck, but we're the ones keeping this place running." Elon's mind raced. These weren't just casual complaints. Rob's words had the weight of a man who was preparing for something big, something that might just change everything. Elon didn't know what that something was, but he could feel it in the air, like a storm waiting to break. He could feel his pulse quicken. This wasn't just a few disgruntled workers. This was something bigger, something that had the potential to rip through the very heart of Tesla. Before he could respond, Rob pulled away and rejoined the group, muttering something under his breath about the inefficiency of the new production methods. Elon watched them for a moment, a knot forming in his stomach. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur, but Elon couldn't stop thinking about what he had just heard. His mind kept circling back to Rob's words. The workers were fed up. But what did that mean for him? Was he just an observer in all this? Or could he do something to fix it? By the time the shift ended, Elon was mentally exhausted. His body was sore from the physical work, but it was the weight of the questions on his mind that truly drained him. Back in his apartment, after another long day of pretending, Elon sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the wall. The factory floor had never felt so distant. He had always thought of Tesla as a place of innovation, a place where the future was being made. But now, as he sat there, he couldn't help but feel like the future was slipping away. The cracks were visible everywhere. The unrest among the workers, the growing frustration with management, the feeling that the heart of Tesla was being slowly crushed under the weight of its own success. Elon had come here to learn what was really happening on the ground. And now, he knew. The workers were disillusioned, the systems were broken, and the very spirit of Tesla, what had made it great, was starting to fade. The question was, could he fix it before it was too late? What do you think is driving the unrest among the workers at Tesla? Is it just about the pressure of the job, or is something deeper at play? How can Elon fix the problems he's uncovering? Share your thoughts below. Elon woke up to an email buzzing on his phone. The timestamp read 5:30 a.m. He hadn't even had time to fully process the events of yesterday before the day had already started to pull him back in. The email was from an unknown source, and it caught his attention immediately. It read, "Dan, you're being watched. Don't trust anyone." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Who would send him this message? And why? His first instinct was to delete it, to brush it off as a prank. But something in his gut told him this wasn't a joke. Tesla had always been a company of intense secrecy and security. Someone was watching him, and that realization sent a cold shiver down his spine. He got out of bed, his mind still racing. What if the workers knew more than he thought? What if they were already onto him? It had been a risk from the start, putting himself undercover among his employees, trying to understand their struggles without them knowing who he really was. But the deeper he went, the more complicated it became. He had to get to work. There was no time to waste, and certainly no time to figure out who was behind the email. Arriving at the factory, the usual cacophony of sounds greeted him. The machines hummed, workers shuffled around, and the chatter filled the air. But today, something felt off. There was an undercurrent of tension that wasn't there before. Something palpable in the air, like a spark just waiting for a flame. As he walked through the factory, his eyes scanned the workers more closely than ever. He couldn't help but wonder if anyone knew who he truly was. Was it possible that someone had pieced it together? He had been cautious, sure, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He made his way to the assembly line, where Kyle was already waiting, his face expressionless as he worked on the Model S parts. Elon approached him with a hesitant smile. "Morning," he said, trying to sound natural. Kyle barely looked up. "Morning, Dan. Ready to get to work?" "Yeah," Elon replied. He tried to focus, to throw himself into the work like he had in the past few days. But today, his mind was too distracted by the email, by the growing tension in the air. It was impossible to shake the sense that something was about to explode. A few hours into the shift, the first signs of rebellion began to emerge in a way Elon hadn't expected. It started when Sarah, the worker who had been the most vocal about the management's failings, approached him at lunch. She didn't sit down next to him like she had before. Instead, she lingered just outside his view, watching him, as if sizing him up. "Dan," she finally said, her voice low and sharp, "I know who you really are." Elon froze, his heart skipping a beat. His first instinct was to deny it, to brush it off with some excuse, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. He had been in the trenches for days, trying to blend in, and now, it seemed the cracks were beginning to show. "Look, I don't know what you're talking about," Elon said, trying to sound calm, but his voice betrayed a hint of nervousness. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "You're not fooling anyone. We know. You think we're stupid? You don't belong here. Not with us." Elon's mind raced. His whole cover was about to collapse. But before he could say anything else, Sarah turned on her heel and walked away, leaving him standing there, unable to move. The rest of the day felt like a blur. Every moment felt charged with a sense of impending doom. as though the whole factory was waiting for something to happen. And then it did. Around mid-afternoon, a loud voice suddenly pierced through the air. "Enough!" Elon spun around to see Brian, the worker he had spoken with earlier in the week, standing in the middle of the assembly line, his face red with anger. He wasn't shouting at anyone in particular, but his voice carried the force of someone who had had enough. "We're done being treated like robots. It's time to do something about this," Brian shouted, his voice trembling with emotion. "The management's not listening. The company's bleeding us dry for profits, and we're the ones who pay the price." A ripple of agreement ran through the workers nearby, some nodding, some murmuring in agreement. Elon's heart raced. He knew that this was no longer just idle talk. This was real. The workers were organizing, and they weren't just frustrated. They were ready to take action. Before Elon could react, Sarah joined Brian in the middle of the floor. She stood next to him, her arms crossed over her chest, her gaze steady and unflinching. "We've been quiet long enough," Sarah said, her voice firm. "This isn't just about a paycheck anymore. This is about respect. This is about not being treated like disposable parts of a machine." Elon felt a wave of anxiety wash over him. He had been trying to learn, to understand, but he hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected the workers to be this close to the breaking point. Brian continued, his voice growing more passionate, more radical. "If they think we'll keep working like this, they've got another thing coming. We'll walk out. We'll shut this place down if we have to." The room seemed to hold its breath. Every worker on the line had stopped what they were doing. Some were looking at Brian with admiration, others with uncertainty. But the tension was electric, thick enough to cut with a knife. Elon stood frozen, watching. He knew that this was the moment, the tipping point. If he didn't act quickly, everything could unravel. He had to decide. Did he reveal himself? Did he expose his true identity and try to use his position to calm the situation down? Or did he continue to observe, to learn, to let the workers find their own way? But before he could make a decision, someone else stepped forward. "Listen," it was Kyle, the worker who had shown him the ropes earlier in the week. His tone was calm, but there was a fire in his eyes. "We're not just a production line. We're people, and we deserve more than what they're giving us. This is the last straw." There it was. The sentiment Elon had been sensing all along. The workers were tired of being treated like cogs in the machine. The system that had once been revolutionary was now a weight on their shoulders, dragging them down. And they were done with it. Kyle's words felt like a death knell to everything Elon had built at Tesla. The company he had fought to create, the culture he had tried to nurture. Everything was at risk of falling apart in this one moment. But still, something in him hesitated. He wasn't sure if he was ready to reveal the truth yet. The workers were close, but they hadn't fully crossed the line. The next few minutes were a blur. There were more words exchanged, more protests, more voices rising in unity. And all the while, Elon stood in the center of it, his heart pounding in his chest. Then, as the voices grew louder, the factory floor suddenly went silent. A tall figure appeared at the far end of the room, framed by the fluorescent lights above. It was a manager, someone from corporate, walking briskly toward the group. The moment had come, and Elon knew, for better or worse, his secret couldn't stay hidden for much longer. The manager's approach sent a ripple of tension through the room. Elon could feel the weight of every eye on him, though he kept his expression neutral. The man, Greg, was one of the senior managers who had been overseeing production for the past year. He was known for his no-nonsense attitude and his relentless focus on meeting quotas. As he walked toward the group of workers, he glanced around, scanning the faces of those gathered. The silence stretched out, an uncomfortable tension hanging in the air. It was clear that Greg had no idea what was happening. He only saw the workers, disgruntled and unruly, and the potential threat to the day's production. Elon, for the first time in days, felt an overwhelming urge to step in. He could see the situation spiraling. The workers were at their breaking point, and the more they were ignored or dismissed, the more they'd push back. The company was about to face a crisis. But how much should he intervene? He had never been the kind of person to shy away from tough decisions. But this wasn't just about numbers and profit margins anymore. This was about real people, their lives, and their futures. The company he had built, the legacy he had crafted, was at stake. But then, as Greg got closer, the question of his identity lingered like a shadow. If he revealed himself as Elon Musk right now, would the workers see him as a leader trying to help them? Or would they see him as just another corporate figure trying to stop their rebellion, someone who had been deceiving them all along? Greg finally reached the group, his stern face barely betraying any emotion. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice clipped. Brian, ever the leader of the disgruntled workers, stepped forward without hesitation. "We've had enough, Greg. This place is falling apart. The management doesn't care about us, and we're done pretending everything's fine." Elon's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the exchange. He could feel the pressure building in the room, but he knew this was a critical moment. The wrong move now, and everything could collapse. Greg crossed his arms, glaring at the workers. "You think this is the way to handle things? You think throwing a tantrum is going to fix anything?" "No," Sarah spoke up, her voice steady. "But it's the only way you'll listen. For once, we want to be heard. We want change." Greg's eyes flicked around the group, trying to gauge the mood. He took a deep breath. "If you're all so dissatisfied, maybe you should consider whether this is the right place for you," he said, his tone dripping with disdain. There it was. The same old dismissal, the same corporate rhetoric. Elon had seen this countless times before in his business dealings. When things got tough, when employees started to speak up, the leadership often resorted to ultimatums. The moment Greg issued his threat, Elon knew the situation was about to escalate. But then, an idea formed in his mind. Elon took a slow, deliberate step forward, his heart racing but his voice calm. "Hold on a second, Greg," he said, cutting through the rising tension. Greg stopped mid-sentence, his eyes narrowing as he turned toward Elon. "Who the hell are you?" Greg asked, as though seeing him for the first time. Elon knew that his cover was about to be blown. Before he could respond, Brian's voice rose again. "I told you, man. We know who he is. He's not some random guy from the factory. He's one of them, a corporate shill, probably just a manager trying to keep us down." Elon took a deep breath. This was it, the moment of truth. He could deny it, run for the hills, and keep the secret intact. But he had already witnessed the raw frustration in the eyes of the workers, felt the crushing weight of their disillusionment. If he didn't come clean now, the company he'd built might never recover. "I'm not a corporate shill," Elon said, his voice steady despite the intense heat in his chest. "I'm Elon Musk. I'm the CEO of Tesla, and I've been working alongside you all undercover for the last few days." A shocked silence fell over the room. The workers froze. Some blinked in disbelief. Others looked at him as though he had just confessed to a crime. "You're your Elon Musk?" Sarah's voice was a mix of disbelief and anger. "You've been here all this time and didn't even tell us who you were?" Elon nodded, feeling the weight of their gazes on him. "I wanted to understand what was happening here. I wanted to see it through your eyes, not just through the lens of a CEO. The truth is, I knew there were problems at Tesla, but I didn't know how bad they were. I didn't know how much you were suffering." There was a tense pause as Elon's words hung in the air. He could feel the room teetering on the edge. The workers were angry, yes, but now they had something to focus on. Something real. Brian spoke first, his voice low and steady. "So, you've been watching us all this time, but you've never done anything about it?" Elon's heart sank. "I didn't know what to do. I couldn't see it clearly from where I was. But now I know. I see how much pain you're all in, and I promise you, I'm going to do everything I can to fix this." The room remained quiet for a moment, the workers unsure of whether to trust him or reject him outright. Then, Kyle stepped forward. His face was unreadable, but there was a quiet fire in his eyes. "So, what now? What are you really going to do, Elon?" Elon took a deep breath. He had to act fast, but also with clarity. He wasn't just a CEO anymore. He was someone who had to prove he cared about the people behind the machines, the people who had made Tesla what it was. "I'm going to start by fixing the communication breakdown," Elon said, his voice clear and unwavering. "I'm going to make sure your voices are heard, not just today, but every day. We're going to rebuild this company, not just from the top down, but from the ground up." You deserve better than this, and I'm going to make sure you get it." The silence was thick, the weight of his words settling in. For the first time, the workers seemed to consider his words, not just as a promise from an executive, but as a genuine commitment from a leader who had finally seen the truth. Kyle looked around at the group and then back at Elon. "We'll see if you can actually change things, Elon. But you better not backpedal on this. We're all watching." Elon nodded, feeling the full gravity of the responsibility on his shoulders. This was his chance to make things right, not just for the workers, but for Tesla as a whole. It wouldn't be easy. It would take time, effort, and a whole lot of transparency. But he was ready. The shockwave from Elon's revelation spread through the factory like wildfire. For the next few hours, the workers didn't know what to do with themselves. It was as if the ground beneath them had shifted. Was this really Elon Musk standing in front of them? Not the faceless executive they had all imagined, but the very man who had built the empire they had been working for? Could they trust him? Or was this just another corporate stunt, another ploy to pacify them temporarily? Elon knew that words alone wouldn't be enough to change their minds. He had already seen the skepticism in their eyes. He had been part of the system, the machine that had failed them. And now, standing in front of them, he was going to have to prove himself. The next morning, Elon arrived at Tesla's headquarters with a new sense of purpose. The factory workers were still on edge, some grumbling and others still uncertain about the sincerity of his intentions. He knew that today would be crucial. He couldn't afford to let the opportunity slip through his fingers. Tesla, the company he had once envisioned as a beacon of innovation and progress, was now teetering on the edge of collapse. The workers' anger wasn't just about their wages or conditions. It was about feeling invisible. It was about the idea that the company had forgotten them, the very people who had made it possible. Elon had always prided himself on his ability to turn things around, to defy the odds. But this wasn't going to be easy. Fixing a broken culture, changing the very DNA of an organization, it required more than just a good speech or grand promises. It required action, real, tangible change. He walked into the boardroom, where the senior executives were waiting. There was a noticeable tension in the air. The usual smug confidence that defined the top brass of Tesla was gone. They had been caught off guard by Elon's undercover operation, and now they weren't sure what to think. Some looked uncomfortable, others looked defensive. Elon wasted no time. "We have a problem," he said, his voice calm but firm. "And that problem is that we've lost sight of what Tesla is supposed to be about. It's not just about making cars. It's about making the world better, and that means making sure the people who build those cars are treated with respect." There was a brief silence. Then, one of the executives, a middle-aged man named Robert, leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Elon, you've always been about the bigger picture, about the long-term vision. But we can't afford to let the company's productivity drop. We're in a competitive market. We need to focus on profits, on scaling up." Elon shook his head, his jaw tightening. "I understand the importance of profits, Robert. Believe me, I do. But without the people behind those profits, there's nothing. If we don't fix the culture at Tesla, if we don't make real changes for the workers who are building the future of this company, we won't have a future to scale. We'll become just another corporation. I refuse to let that happen." The room fell silent again. Elon could feel the weight of his words settle over the table. He had expected resistance, but the executive's discomfort was palpable. They weren't used to hearing this kind of talk from him. They were used to Elon's visionary ideas, his ambition to reach Mars and revolutionize transportation. They were not used to him talking about people over profits. Finally, Robert spoke again, his voice lower this time. "What exactly are you proposing, Elon?" "I'm proposing a complete overhaul of how we operate," Elon said. "We need to start by creating a direct line of communication between management and the factory floor. The workers need to feel heard, and we need to involve them in decisions about their work environment, their schedules, and their compensation. It's not enough to make a one-size-fits-all solution. Every department, every team, needs to feel like they're part of the larger mission." The room grew uncomfortable again, and Elon could see that not everyone was on board with this. But he pressed on. "I want to create a new department, a workers' council, if you will. It will be made up of people from all levels of the factory, from the assembly line to the engineers. This council will have direct input on all major decisions, especially when it comes to things that affect the day-to-day lives of our workers. There was a murmur of discontent from the group. Robert was the first to speak. You want to give factory workers the power to make decisions? Do you understand what that means? It's a risk, Elon. The production line could be disrupted, and we'll lose our competitive edge. I'm aware of the risks, Elon said, his voice unwavering. But if we don't make this change, we risk losing something even more important, the trust of the people who make this company run. The workers need to know that their voices matter. The rest of the meeting was a blur of arguments, counterpoints, and some hesitant agreement. Elon knew it wouldn't be easy, but he also knew this was the right move. Tesla was at a crossroads. If he didn't change course now, the company would continue on its trajectory of high profits but diminishing morale. He had to choose between being a leader who drove growth at the expense of people, or one who led with empathy and vision for both the company and its workers. As the meeting wrapped up, Elon felt both exhausted and resolute. He knew he was going to face resistance, but the first step had been taken. Now, he had to make the next move, and this time, it wasn't just about Tesla's survival. It was about restoring dignity to every worker who had put their trust in the company. Later that afternoon, Elon made his way back to the factory. The workers had been notified about the new changes, and he knew the news would either solidify their trust in him or break it entirely. His heart was in his throat as he walked through the factory doors. He wasn't sure what to expect, whether they would accept his promises or reject him entirely. But one thing was certain. This was the moment where everything could either change or fall apart. As he entered the assembly line, the workers were quieter than usual. Some had heard about the meeting, others hadn't. Elon approached Sarah first, her gaze hard but inquisitive. "Well?" she asked, crossing her arms. "What's going to change now?" Elon took a deep breath. "I'm serious about making things better. I'm going to give you all a voice. We're going to fix the issues that matter to you, and we're going to do it together. I won't let you down." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "We've heard that kind of talk before. It's easy to say things, Elon. It's another thing to actually do them." Elon nodded, understanding the skepticism. "I know," he said, "but this time, it's different. You'll see." As the day progressed, the workers went about their tasks with a wary optimism. There was still a lot of doubt in the air, but Elon could sense a shift. The workers weren't ready to fully believe him yet, but they were willing to see if he could prove his commitment. And as he walked the factory floor, observing, listening, and interacting, one thing became clear. This was only the beginning. The road ahead would be long, and the challenges would be many. But for the first time in years, Elon Musk felt that the future of Tesla might not just depend on cutting-edge technology or visionary goals. It might just depend on something simpler, human connection. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of meetings, changes, and, most importantly, tension. Elon had pulled out all the stops to show the workers that he was serious about creating a better Tesla, one that valued every employee, from the assembly line to the engineers. But the reality of corporate culture was proving more difficult to change than he had imagined. Tesla's workers weren't easily swayed. They had been burned before by promises of improvement that never materialized, and many of them weren't ready to trust Elon Musk just because he had shown up in a hoodie and jeans to stand beside them. Actions spoke louder than words, and Elon knew he had a long road ahead to prove that his changes weren't just another fleeting initiative. The first test came sooner than expected. A major issue arose on the production line. A shipment of parts from one of Tesla's key suppliers had arrived late, throwing off the entire schedule. This wasn't the first time it had happened, and it wasn't the first time it had led to angry exchanges between the workers and management. The difference now, however, was that the workers had been given more of a voice. They weren't just passively accepting the delays. They were angry, and they weren't afraid to show it. Elon walked into the factory early one morning, his usual calm demeanor replaced with a sense of urgency. The workers were gathering around a group of supervisors, discussing how to handle the delays. Their voices were raised, tempers were flaring, and the mood was tense. Sarah was in the middle of it all, her face flushed with frustration as she spoke to one of the supervisors. When she saw Elon approach, her expression hardened. "Here comes the CEO," she muttered under her breath, but loud enough for him to hear. Elon paused for a moment, taking in the scene. This was the first real test of his promises. He had told them he would be different, that he would listen, but now it was time to prove it. Sarah, Elon said, his voice calm but firm. What's going on? She glanced at him, her expression unreadable. Another shipment delay. The same old story. Parts didn't arrive on time, and now we have to figure out how to make up for it. She shook her head, clearly frustrated. But the thing is, this isn't just about the parts. It's about how we're treated every time something goes wrong. You guys up there, she gestured toward the office building, don't care about the impact it has on us down here. Elon took a deep breath. He had expected this level of frustration. You're right. I'm not going to sit here and pretend everything is okay. But this is the reality we're dealing with. We need to come up with a solution together. I can't fix this from the top down. I need your input. There was a noticeable pause. For a moment, no one spoke. Sarah stared at him, weighing his words. Are you really saying you want us to help figure this out? She asked, the edge in her voice unmistakable. Yes, Elon said, his voice steady. I'm saying we're in this together. We need to find a way to work through this. I don't have all the answers, but I'll listen to what you think we should do. The workers exchanged glances, unsure of how to respond. Elon could see the hesitation in their eyes. He wasn't just asking for their input. He was asking them to trust him again. And that was no small thing. Brian, who had been quiet until now, stepped forward. All right, Elon. If you're serious, we need better communication between departments. The parts issue isn't new, but nobody in management has made an effort to really fix it. You want us to be part of the solution? Then get your supply chain and logistics teams on board. Get them talking to us. Elon nodded, grateful for Brian's straightforwardness. I'll make sure that happens. But it's not just about logistics. We need to look at how we handle these situations across the board. We need a system that helps us resolve problems before they escalate, not after. Let's figure out what that looks like together. Sarah didn't look entirely convinced, but she seemed to soften. All right, but don't just give us lip service. We've been promised changes before, and it hasn't worked. Elon met her gaze, his eyes steady. I understand why you're skeptical. I do. But this time, I'm not backing down. Let's fix this together. Over the next few days, Elon took his promises to heart. He set up a series of meetings between the factory workers, the supply chain team, and the production managers. The goal was simple: to get every department talking, to build a collaborative system that would allow them to handle problems before they blew up. Elon also instituted weekly feedback sessions, where employees could speak directly to management about what was working and what wasn't. It was slow going at first. The workers were still hesitant, still unsure if this new approach was really going to make a difference. But there was a noticeable shift. For the first time in a long time, they were starting to feel like they had a say in how things were done. They weren't just doing the dirty work. They were part of the process. One afternoon, about a week after the first meeting, Elon visited the production line again. Sarah was there, supervising the assembly of a batch of Model 3s. She was focused, but when she saw him approaching, she took a brief moment to acknowledge him. Elon, she said, giving him a slight nod. I have to admit, things have been smoother lately. The communication is better. We've got a better understanding of why things are delayed and what's being done to fix it. Elon smiled, relieved to hear that things were improving. That's good to hear. It's not perfect yet, but we're getting there. How's the team feeling about the changes? She hesitated, then spoke more thoughtfully. I think they're cautiously optimistic. But you know as well as I do that it's going to take time to really change things. Trust isn't built overnight. I know, Elon agreed. But we'll keep pushing forward. We'll keep making changes, one step at a time. Sarah gave him a small, but genuine smile. Well, it's better than nothing. I guess that's a start. Despite the small victories, Elon knew the real challenge was still ahead. He had shown that he could listen, that he could make some immediate changes, but the deeper issues, the systemic problems that had been festering at Tesla for years, weren't going to be solved so easily. Trust had to be earned, and that meant showing up every day, making tough decisions, and following through on promises. There were still whispers in the halls, skepticism from some corners of the workforce, and resistance from certain executives. The board had been reluctant to embrace the changes Elon was pushing for, and there were still people in the upper echelons of the company who saw the Workers' Council as a threat to their power. But Elon was committed. He knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. The question wasn't whether the workers and management could find common ground. It was whether he, as CEO, could steer the company through the storm. The weeks after Elon's changes began to unfold were both exhilarating and frustrating. On the surface, there were positive shifts. The production floor had become more cooperative, and the workers were engaging in conversations with the supply chain and logistics teams more openly than ever before. But beneath this visible change, the tension between different factions within Tesla was growing. Elon was used to facing resistance. He had been challenging the status quo his entire career. But the stakes at Tesla were higher now. He wasn't just building cars or launching rockets. He was trying to rebuild trust, something that could easily slip through his fingers. One morning, as Elon sat in his office going over reports, his assistant, Jessica, knocked on the door. "Mr. Musk," she said, her tone serious, "there's a situation in the factory. Sarah's leading a walkout." Elon's heart skipped a beat. Sarah, the worker who had been one of the first to give him a chance, was now leading a protest? He quickly stood up, grabbing his jacket. "What happened?" he asked, his mind racing. "They say it's over the new shift schedules," Jessica replied. "Some of the workers feel that the changes you implemented aren't enough, and they're demanding more flexibility. There's a lot of frustration about how much is being asked of them and how little they feel they're being heard. They've already gathered outside the factory." Elon felt the weight of the situation. Just when things seemed to be improving, a new problem had surfaced, and it was centered around something he hadn't anticipated: work-life balance. When Elon arrived at the factory, he could already see the crowd gathered outside. Sarah was at the front, flanked by a handful of her colleagues. They looked determined but weary, as if they had been preparing for this moment for weeks. Elon's stomach tightened as he approached. "Sarah," he called, his voice cutting through the chatter. "What's going on? Why are you leading a walkout?" Sarah turned to face him, her expression a mix of frustration and resolve. "Elon, you promised us change, but things haven't gotten any better. The shift schedules are still brutal. Some workers are pulling double shifts, and it's killing them. And you know what? There's still no clear communication about how we're supposed to manage these changes. You've made some promises, but we need more." Elon took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words. She was right. In his zeal to make the big changes, to bring transparency and unity to the company, he had overlooked some of the more personal, day-to-day issues that had led to workers' burnout in the first place. "I hear you, Sarah," Elon said, his voice calm but urgent. "But let's talk about it. I'm not going to let this problem fester. You're right, we haven't done enough to address shift schedules, and we haven't been clear about expectations. I'll sit down with you and the team, and we'll find a solution together. But walking out isn't going to solve the issue." Sarah didn't budge. "We've tried talking. We've tried waiting. The management team hasn't listened, and now we're making our voices heard." Elon was taken aback, but he knew she had a point. "All right," he said, glancing around at the others in the crowd. "Let's all sit down right now. We'll talk through this. You have my word." The group reluctantly agreed to follow him into the break room, where Elon set up an impromptu meeting with a few of the most vocal workers, including Sarah. There were some tense moments as the workers took their seats, their arms crossed, their eyes narrowed. Elon could feel the suspicion in the room. "You said you wanted to listen," Sarah started, her voice firm. "Well, we're going to lay it out for you, Elon. The schedules are still too demanding, and the management team isn't giving us enough leeway to adjust. We're being asked to do more with less, and it's killing morale." Elon nodded, taking mental notes. He had heard about the issue in passing, but now he understood its full scope. The problem wasn't just about hours. It was about control, flexibility, and the lack of respect for the workers' time outside of Tesla. "I understand," Elon said, his voice steady, "and I'm going to make sure we address this immediately. We need to create a schedule that allows for more flexibility, where the workers have more input in when they work. You shouldn't feel like you're being forced into these schedules with no choice." We're going to work on a system that's fair and gives you the control you deserve." The room was quiet for a moment. Sarah's face softened slightly, though she remained skeptical. "We've heard promises before, Elon. I'm not convinced until I see real changes." "I get it," Elon replied, "but I'm going to do whatever it takes to make sure you're treated with the respect you deserve. We'll start with the schedules, and we'll keep working on improving things step by step. I want you to feel like you can come to me with any issue. No one should feel left behind." As the meeting continued, the workers slowly started to engage more. Elon didn't have all the answers yet, but he knew that this conversation was a crucial first step. The more he listened, the clearer the picture became. The workers were tired, overworked, and feeling underappreciated. They weren't just protesting for better hours. They were protesting because they had been ignored for too long. The next few days were a blur of meetings, brainstorming sessions, and feedback loops. Elon knew this wasn't going to be an easy fix, but he was committed to taking the necessary steps to rebuild the foundation of trust. He brought in external consultants to help redesign the shift schedules, working with Sarah and the other factory workers to create a system that would work for everyone. Meanwhile, in the upper levels of Tesla's management, the situation was becoming increasingly strained. The board, still reeling from Elon's undercover stunt, was beginning to question whether the changes Elon was making were in line with the company's long-term financial goals. The board members had always been more concerned with profitability than worker satisfaction, and the latest unrest only deepened their concerns. At a tense board meeting, one of the senior executives, Amanda, spoke up. "Elon, we're losing focus here. You've been making all these changes, but the numbers aren't improving. Our production is falling behind, and we're not hitting our profit targets. We need to rethink this." Elon's eyes narrowed. He had expected this kind of pushback. "Amanda, the numbers will come in time. But if we don't address the culture of this company, if we don't invest in our people, then we won't have a company to worry about. We need to be patient. The changes I'm making aren't about quick fixes. They're about building something sustainable. It's not just about profits. It's about creating a Tesla that people are proud to work for." Amanda didn't look convinced, but Elon could see that his words had made an impact. The battle between profits and people was now fully underway. As the weeks passed, the situation remained tense. While the workers were cautiously optimistic about the new schedules, the battle for Tesla's future was far from over. Elon knew that he was up against powerful forces, within the company and outside of it, but he wasn't backing down. He was determined to show the world that Tesla could be both a leader in innovation and a company that treated its workers with respect. Every decision, every move he made now felt heavier, but he was resolute. The future of Tesla, his company, and its employees depended on how he navigated this delicate balance. The tension within Tesla had reached new heights. The ongoing clash between employee demands and boardroom priorities was creating an environment of uncertainty. Elon's commitment to overhauling the company's culture, especially on the factory floor, was still in motion, but it was clear that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. Tesla's employees had expressed their frustrations, and while Elon had promised change, there were still whispers that his vision was not shared by everyone, especially in the upper management echelons. The factory, though a bit calmer after the shift schedule adjustments, wasn't quite at peace. There were moments of progress, but also moments of intense scrutiny, internally and externally. It was a Friday morning when Elon found himself standing outside the Tesla factory, gazing out at the expansive grounds. His mind was restless, weighed down by the various moving pieces of his grand plan. The work culture was shifting, but it was a slow process. The workforce, although a bit more trusting, remained wary. Meanwhile, back in the boardroom, Amanda and others were growing more concerned with the cost of these cultural changes. The numbers weren't quite where they needed to be, and the profits were being delayed. His thoughts were interrupted when Sarah appeared at his side, her expression neutral. She had become one of the most vocal advocates for change, but her skepticism had also grown. "Elon," she said quietly, looking at the factory's large buildings, "there's something else. I don't know how to put this, but the morale is still low. It's better than it was, but there's something missing." Elon nodded. He had sensed it too. While some things were improving, there was still a deep, underlying exhaustion that permeated the factory floors. It wasn't just about the hours or the schedules. It was about a lack of true engagement, a disconnect between the workers and the vision he was trying to instill. I've been thinking about that, Elon said thoughtfully, looking toward the horizon. You're right. We've made changes to the structure, but we need to address something deeper, the heart of the culture. It's not just about time or pay. It's about creating a purpose. Sarah turned toward him, raising an eyebrow. Purpose? Exactly. Purpose. People don't just want a paycheck. They want to feel like they're part of something larger than themselves. They need to feel like they're not just working in a factory, they're building the future of humanity. Elon paused. But I've been too focused on the operational side of things. I've been forgetting about the soul of Tesla. Sarah studied him for a long moment. You mean like what you've done at SpaceX? Where people are literally working for something that feels bigger than themselves. Elon nodded. That's exactly it. We're not just making cars here. We're building something that will outlast all of us. That's what I need to convey to everyone. What we do here matters. The following days were spent in meetings with key managers, as well as informal conversations with employees. Elon laid out his new initiative, Tesla's new purpose project. The idea was simple, but ambitious, to redefine the company's mission, not just as a car manufacturer, but as a catalyst for change. Elon wanted every worker, from the engineers to the assembly line workers, to feel like they were part of something world-changing. But not everyone bought into this vision, least of all the board. The tension between Elon's idealistic approach and the board's pragmatic concerns continued to escalate. At the next board meeting, Amanda wasted no time. Elon, these cultural initiatives you've been pushing are important, but they're coming at a cost. The production targets aren't being met, and morale, though better, isn't where it needs to be to meet our goals. We're getting calls from investors who are starting to get nervous. How can we justify all these changes if we're still falling short in terms of profitability? Elon stood at the head of the table, his hands folded behind his back. I understand your concerns, Amanda, but I'm telling you, these changes are necessary. We're not just selling cars. We're selling an idea. The idea that we can build a sustainable future for humanity. If we don't invest in our people, in their well-being and their sense of purpose, we'll lose them. And we can't afford that. I don't disagree with your vision, Elon, Amanda replied, her voice tight. But I'm looking at the facts. Investors won't care about our purpose if we don't hit our numbers. We need to make some hard decisions about where we focus our energy. We can't chase idealism at the expense of the business. There was a heavy silence as the room processed her words. Elon felt a growing pressure, but he also felt a sense of clarity. He had always known that this moment would come. The fight for Tesla's future was not just about technology or the bottom line. It was about redefining what success meant. I'm not asking you to abandon profitability, Elon said, his voice calm but unwavering. I'm asking you to trust me that these changes will create a more engaged, committed workforce. When people feel like they're part of something bigger than just a paycheck, they work harder, they innovate more, and they stay longer. That's the key to long-term success. That evening, as the board meeting concluded, Elon felt a heavy weight on his shoulders. He had successfully argued his case for the importance of company culture, but he knew the battle was far from over. The board was still wary, and the clock was ticking. He had to prove that his vision was not just a lofty ideal, but something that would truly drive Tesla forward. As he walked out of the boardroom, he was met by Jessica, who handed him a phone. Elon, it's Sarah, she said, her voice filled with urgency. She says it's important. Elon quickly took the phone. Sarah, what's going on? Elon, we have a problem. Sarah's voice was tight, urgent. It's one of the workers. He's gone public with some very serious complaints about working conditions. It's going to hit the news soon. The news hit like a wave the next day. A worker, long disgruntled with the company's culture, had taken to social media with a post about his experiences. The post quickly went viral, detailing not just the grueling hours, but also the lack of adequate support for mental health, the constant pressure to produce, and the sense that no one in management truly cared about the workers' well-being. The backlash was swift and fierce. Tesla's social media accounts were flooded with messages of outrage from former and current employees. The media picked up the story, painting a picture of an uncaring corporate giant more interested in profits than the lives of its workers. Elon read the post in silence, his mind racing. This was not just a setback, it was a full-blown crisis. The very thing he had been working to fix was now the focal point of public scrutiny. The next few days were spent in a whirlwind of meetings and damage control. Elon had to respond, quickly and effectively. He scheduled a live-streamed company-wide meeting, something he had never done before. This would be his moment to speak directly to the employees and the public. When the time came, he stood before the camera, the weight of the moment bearing down on him. Tesla is more than just a company, Elon began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. We are building the future of sustainable energy, and that vision can only succeed if we are all in it together. I know that we have made mistakes, and I know that many of you feel unheard and unsupported. That is on me. I take full responsibility. He paused, looking directly into the camera. I'm committed to making things right. We will address the issues you've raised, starting with better mental health support, better work-life balance, and better communication. I am listening to you, and I will do whatever it takes to fix this. Elon's words were raw, and though they were aimed at the workers, they were also aimed at the world. The future of Tesla was at stake, and he knew that if he failed now, everything he had worked for could unravel. The live-streamed address Elon gave to the company was a turning point, but it wasn't enough to quiet the storm that was brewing. The media continued to run the story, with headlines like Tesla's CEO faces worker uprising and Tesla's idealism versus its workers. Can Elon Musk walk the talk? Dominating the news cycle. The public perception was in flux. Some admired his candid response, while others remained skeptical of whether Tesla would follow through on its promises. In the days that followed, Elon remained committed to the task at hand. He personally reached out to key employees, from the factory floor to the C-suite, to better understand their concerns and reassure them that he was working to make things right. But even with these efforts, the pressure continued to mount. The board was particularly vocal. Amanda had been on edge since the viral post, and she wasn't alone. The concerns about profitability were now intertwined with questions about leadership. Had Elon been too focused on culture, ignoring the realities of running a business? One morning, Elon sat in his office with Jessica, scrolling through the hundreds of emails and messages flooding his inbox. Some were messages of support from loyal employees, but most were angry comments from both Tesla customers and ex-employees. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, but he knew he couldn't retreat into his usual tunnel vision. This was no longer just about engineering the best car or sending rockets to space. This was about leading a company through a crisis. Jessica cleared her throat, breaking his train of thought. Elon, the board is asking for an emergency meeting. They want to discuss your response to the situation and whether we need to make more drastic changes. Elon leaned back in his chair. Of course they do, he muttered under his breath. He had been expecting this. I know you've been under a lot of pressure, Jessica said cautiously, but you can't ignore the reality. The situation is dire, and if you don't show decisive leadership, things could spiral out of control. He stood up, walking to the window, looking out over the vast Tesla campus. It felt as though the entire future of the company was hanging by a thread. I'm not ignoring it, Jessica, but if I back down now, if I cave to their demands, we'll be sending the message that this is all just a game. It's not. I'm not going to compromise on the culture of this company. She nodded, but there was a look in her eyes that suggested she was still uncertain. Elon could tell that she was worried, as much about his well-being as the company's future. The board meeting that afternoon was tense. As Elon entered the conference room, he was met with the usual blend of board members, some wary, some irritated, and a few who seemed genuinely concerned. At the head of the table, Amanda gave him a cool nod. Elon, we need to address the current situation, Amanda began. You've publicly committed to resolving the worker unrest, and we appreciate that, but we still haven't seen any measurable results. In fact, production delays are increasing, and we're falling behind on delivery targets. We can't afford to ignore the financial health of the company while trying to fix culture. Elon took a seat at the table, his posture straight but his mind racing. He knew he was under intense scrutiny, and this conversation could be pivotal in deciding the future direction of the company. I understand your concerns, Amanda, he said, his voice calm but firm. But this isn't just about production numbers. It's about building a sustainable company, a company that can last beyond quarterly profits. We've seen what happens when companies prioritize profits at the expense of their employees: burnout, disengagement, high turnover. We cannot afford that. A board member, George, chimed in. But you're asking us to make huge sacrifices, Elon. We've seen no real change in production despite all the culture shifts. What's your plan here? We need results. Now. I'm working on it, Elon replied, his voice unwavering. You will see results. I know it's tough right now, but change takes time. It's not just about faster production lines. It's about building trust, empowering employees, and creating a system where everyone feels like they're contributing to something bigger. Once that happens, the results will follow. Amanda looked at Elon, her expression unreadable. We're not saying we don't believe in your vision, Elon. We're just concerned about how long we can afford to wait for results. The investors are getting restless. Elon knew the pressure was mounting, but he wasn't about to back down now. I'm committed to making the necessary changes, and I'm confident they will pay off. But you have to trust me, at least for a little while longer. I need your support. The room was quiet for a long moment as the board members exchanged looks. Finally, Amanda spoke again. We'll give you one more quarter to show progress. But that's it. If we don't see results, meaning real production improvements and measurable cultural shifts, we'll have to revisit this strategy. Understand? Elon nodded. I understand. Thank you. As the board meeting concluded, Elon felt both relieved and more burdened than ever. One more quarter. That was all the time he had to prove that his vision for Tesla was the right one. There was no room for error. If he couldn't get the balance between cultural transformation and financial success right, it could spell the end of his leadership at Tesla. The days following the board meeting were consumed with a frantic mix of hands-on management, strategic planning, and personal reflection. Elon worked closely with his senior leadership team to put in place a clear plan for both improving production efficiency and reinforcing the company culture. He began working directly with the engineering and production teams again, something he hadn't done in a while, to better understand their concerns and implement new initiatives to streamline the process. But even as he worked tirelessly, the cracks in the foundation of Tesla's culture were still visible. The workers, although still mostly supportive, remained wary. Some questioned whether Elon's promises were just another round of corporate speak, while others feared the pressure to meet impossible production deadlines would undo any cultural progress that had been made. Then, one fateful Tuesday afternoon, a new email from Sarah hit Elon's inbox. The subject line was simple: a breakthrough. Elon clicked on it immediately, feeling a mix of hope and anxiety. Hey Elon, Sarah's email began. I've been thinking a lot about our last conversation, and I think I might have an idea that could help us get past this. The morale is still low, but I think we're missing something big here. It's not just about flexible schedules or higher pay. We need to feel like we're a part of something that we control, not just something you tell us to do. What if we started implementing workshops where employees at every level can pitch ideas, solve problems, and have a direct impact on our production processes? People are feeling disconnected, but maybe this could give them a sense of ownership. We need to feel like we have a stake in Tesla's success, not just a job. Elon leaned back in his chair, his heart racing. Sarah had always been insightful, but this idea felt different. It was a tangible way to bring the workers into the fold, to give them a sense of purpose and ownership in Tesla's success. It wasn't a quick fix, but it was a step in the right direction. He immediately began working with his team to develop a plan for these workshops, where employees could not only voice their ideas but actively participate in shaping the company's future. The idea was simple but powerful. Empower the workforce, give them agency, and create a sense of ownership that would build long-term loyalty and morale. Elon is facing the toughest challenge of his career. One more quarter to prove that his vision can transform Tesla both culturally and financially. Will the new workshops be the key to bridging the gap between leadership and workers? Or is it too little, too late? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The weeks following the announcement of the employee workshops were a whirlwind of excitement and apprehension. Elon's team worked tirelessly to get the program off the ground, creating a framework that would allow workers at all levels of the company to submit their ideas, collaborate on solving problems, and actively shape Tesla's future. The response from employees was immediate and divided. Some saw it as a fresh opportunity to have their voices heard, to influence the company's direction in ways that went beyond the production line. Others were more skeptical, having been burned by corporate promises before. They wanted to see results, not just more meetings and rhetoric. Despite the mixed reception, Elon remained committed. This was the last attempt he could afford to make before the quarterly review. The board had given him until the end of the quarter to deliver tangible results, and he knew that he was running out of time. The first workshop was held at the Tesla Fremont factory, and Elon had personally invited a cross-section of employees from different departments: assembly line workers, engineers, software developers, even janitorial staff. Everyone, no matter their role, was invited to participate. The conference room was packed. Elon stood at the front, facing a sea of faces that ranged from eager to skeptical. There were some familiar faces from the factory floors, people who had been with Tesla from the beginning and had seen firsthand how things had changed over the years. Elon, we appreciate the opportunity to speak up, but what's the real goal here? One of the workers, a middle-aged man named Rick, asked bluntly. He was a long-time employee, known for being outspoken, and his comment hit the room with an awkward silence. Elon looked him in the eye, not shying away from the challenge. Rick, I get it. You've heard it all before, the promises, the quick fixes. But this isn't a one-time thing. It's about creating a space where every one of us has a say in shaping what happens next. I don't just want to hear what's wrong. I want us to come up with solutions together. Rick nodded slowly, but there was still a hint of doubt in his expression. All right, let's see what happens. Elon's team began guiding the employees through a series of brainstorming exercises focused on practical ideas to improve both productivity and morale. They looked at everything from the workflow on the factory floor to new ways to streamline production and improve work-life balance. It wasn't long before the floodgates opened. Employees who had been quiet during the regular meetings started to speak up, offering solutions that ranged from small, operational tweaks to larger, more visionary ideas. One employee suggested a new design for the assembly line that could improve efficiency by 20%. Another suggested revamping the company's communication strategy to make management more accessible and transparent. By the end of the day, the room buzzed with energy. For the first time in months, the employees felt like they were not just part of a factory, but part of a shared mission. The sense of ownership was palpable, and even Rick, who had been the most skeptical, walked away with a thoughtful look on his face. Later that evening, Elon sat in his office, reviewing the notes and feedback from the workshop. He was exhausted but energized by what he had seen. There was real potential here, real ideas that could change the way Tesla operated. It was proof that his employees wanted to be part of something larger than just turning out cars. They wanted to make an impact, and now they had a platform to do so. His phone buzzed on the desk, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a text from Sarah. Elon, things are looking good, but there's something we need to talk about. He quickly replied, I'll meet you in 10 minutes. A few minutes later, Elon walked into the conference room where Sarah was already waiting. She was pacing back and forth, a look of concern on her face. Elon, I think we need to talk about the board, Sarah began without preamble. You're pushing this culture shift harder than anyone expected, and it's working. The workshops are a success, but we both know that's not enough. The board is still focused on numbers. And if the next quarter doesn't show major progress in production and profitability, they're not going to care about any of this. Elon ran a hand through his hair. I know. They've given me one more quarter to prove that the culture shift can drive results. If we can't show improvements, we're in trouble. Exactly, Sarah said, her voice tight with concern. We need to make sure that the changes we're implementing are visible, not just to employees, but to the board and the investors. They won't give us a pass just because employees feel more engaged. Elon thought for a moment. What if we can prove that the cultural changes are already improving production? What if the workshops are already creating efficiencies? Sarah raised an eyebrow. Are you saying the workshops will fix the production issues right away? No, Elon admitted. But what if they can provide us with innovative ideas that can make a real difference in the next few weeks? What if the process of getting everyone involved in problem solving leads to faster problem solving? Sarah seemed to consider this, nodding slowly. I see your point. If we can showcase tangible progress in production and the cultural shift at the same time, that might just be the proof the board needs. But we need results, and we need them quickly. The next few weeks became a race against the clock. Elon and his leadership team worked tirelessly to implement some of the best ideas from the workshops. Some were quick wins, like tweaks to the factory workflow and adjustments to the production line. Others were longer-term changes, such as improving cross-department communication and investing in better employee training. At the same time, Elon doubled down on his efforts to foster a culture of ownership and transparency. He spent more time on the factory floor, interacting directly with employees, asking for their feedback, and making it clear that their voices mattered. The company's internal communications were revamped to highlight employee successes, reinforcing the idea that everyone at Tesla was part of a larger mission. As the end of the quarter loomed, the first signs of progress were becoming visible. Production numbers were starting to climb, and although they hadn't reached the levels the board had hoped for, the improvement was undeniable. The employees were engaged, and the energy on the factory floor had shifted. The new workshop model was paying off, not just in terms of ideas, but in the sense of community it was fostering. Then, just as the pressure was beginning to ease, a new challenge emerged. Elon received a message that would shake the foundation of everything he had been working toward. As the deadline for the end of the quarter approached, tension hung thick in the air at Tesla headquarters. Elon knew that the next few weeks would make or break everything he had worked toward. The board was still skeptical, the investors were restless, and the clock was ticking. Despite the improvements in morale and a few key production wins, Elon could feel the pressure building. The workshops were producing innovative ideas and a renewed sense of ownership among employees. But were those intangible benefits enough to satisfy the cold, hard numbers that the board demanded? Elon had always thrived under pressure, but this time it felt different. This time, the stakes weren't just about the success of a new product or another milestone in space exploration. This was about Tesla's survival and his own leadership. One afternoon, Elon found himself pacing the length of the sleek, minimalist conference room. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a sweeping view of the Tesla Gigafactory, a symbol of the company's ambitions, yet at that moment, it felt more like a looming reminder of the looming deadline. The sound of footsteps approaching snapped him out of his thoughts. It was Sarah. "Got a minute?" she asked, her voice measured. "Of course, come in," Elon said, gesturing to the chair across from him. His mind was spinning with the 1,000 tasks on his plate, but he knew Sarah was as crucial to the company's turnaround as any of his engineers. She sat down and folded her hands on the table, looking at him intently. "Elon, I've been talking to the leadership team, and they're worried. We've seen some improvements, but production numbers are still behind schedule. The workers are motivated, but the results aren't there yet." Elon nodded, rubbing his temple. "I know. The board's going to be breathing down our necks. I can feel it already. But I truly believe that this shift in culture will pay off in the long run. I just need to show them we're moving in the right direction." Sarah hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Elon, I'm with you on this. But we need to start thinking about what happens if we can't make the numbers in time. If we go into the quarterly review with a subpar performance, it could be the beginning of the end for you here. You know that, right?" Elon's face hardened, but he didn't look away. "I'm not going to sacrifice the vision for the numbers. The culture and the people come first." "I get that. I really do. But if we don't show tangible improvements, you might lose the support you've been working so hard to build." The room fell silent for a long moment, and Elon could almost hear the gears turning in his head. He could feel the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, more than ever before. The direction he took in the next few weeks would determine not only Tesla's future, but his own legacy. In the days that followed, Elon doubled down on his commitment to the employees. He spent more time with them on the factory floor, focusing on listening, observing, and building further trust. As he worked side by side with employees, he saw glimpses of real progress. There was a noticeable shift in energy, a renewed sense of pride in the work they were doing, and a palpable sense of camaraderie that hadn't been there before. But he was also growing more anxious. The numbers were improving, but slowly. Would it be enough? Could he make it in time for the quarterly review? He knew he needed something bigger, something that would show immediate impact to the board. Then, as if fate were testing him, a crisis hit. Late one evening, Elon received a call from Jared, one of the senior engineers. There was an issue with the Model S production line. A significant component of the assembly process had broken down, and the backup systems weren't working as expected. If the issue wasn't fixed quickly, the delays could cause a ripple effect that would hurt their quarterly numbers and possibly endanger the production targets for months. Elon's heart sank. This was the last thing they needed. But then, something unexpected happened. Instead of panicking, he felt a strange sense of clarity. This wasn't just about numbers or profits anymore. This was the moment he had been preparing for. This was the test of everything he had been building over the last few months: the culture, the employee engagement, the sense of ownership. Elon immediately called a meeting with the engineering team, the production leads, and several workers who had participated in the recent workshops. They gathered in the operations center, a tense group of engineers and managers, staring at the malfunctioning assembly line on their screens. "What's the plan?" Elon asked, his voice calm but authoritative. "We've got a backup system in place," Jared said, "but it's not ideal. If we don't fix the underlying issue, it could lead to even bigger delays." Elon turned to the workers in the room. "What would you do if you were in charge of this process?" he asked them. There was a brief silence before one of the workers, a middle-aged woman named Carla, spoke up. "If we have to rely on the backup system, we'll waste time and money. But if we rework the assembly process just a little, cut some corners without sacrificing quality, we can get back on track faster." It was a bold idea, but it made sense. Elon nodded and turned to his engineers. "Let's do it. No more delays. We need a solution now." The team sprang into action, implementing the new approach. They reworked the process in real time, using the feedback from the employees who had first-hand knowledge of the production line. It was a tense few hours, with everyone working around the clock to get the system back up and running. But when the final tests were complete, the production line hummed back to life, smoother than before. Elon exhaled in relief. The crisis had been averted, at least for now. As the end of the quarter drew nearer, Elon felt like the company was on the edge of something great, but also standing at the precipice of disaster. The board was about to meet again, and it was clear that this was the moment of truth. Elon had to deliver. With the improvements in the workshops, the new approaches to production, and the sense of unity he had helped foster, Tesla was showing signs of progress. But would it be enough to turn the tide in time? The clock was ticking. One final meeting loomed large, Elon and his team's last chance to prove to the board that Tesla was on the right track. The pressure was on. The day had arrived. The boardroom was stark and imposing, as it always was during Tesla's high-stakes quarterly reviews. Elon stood at the head of the long, polished table, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. This wasn't just another board meeting. It was the culmination of months of hard work, of challenging his employees to take ownership and rethink how they did things, of fighting for a new culture that placed innovation and people at its core. But now, with everything on the line, he had to prove that it wasn't just a nice idea or a motivational experiment. He had to show the board that the new Tesla was more than just a vision. It was a functioning, thriving company capable of meeting the market's demands. As the board members trickled in, their faces were a mix of skepticism and quiet anticipation. Some had bought into Elon's bold vision, others less so. Elon's challenge was to convince them all. He took his seat at the head of the table, flanked by Sarah, Jared, and a few key team leaders. The projector hummed to life, casting a bright blue glow on the wall behind him. He cleared his throat, feeling the weight of the moment. "Good morning, everyone. I know the past few months have been challenging, and I appreciate your patience," Elon began, his voice steady but with a hint of urgency. "But I stand before you today with something that I believe will change Tesla for the better, forever." He clicked the remote in his hand, and a graph appeared on the screen, displaying the latest production numbers. There was a noticeable uptick in efficiency and output over the past few weeks, though still not quite up to the board's high expectations. "These numbers aren't where we want them to be yet. I'm not going to pretend they are," Elon continued. "But what you're seeing here is the result of a shift that we've been implementing at Tesla, one that starts with culture and ends with results." The board members exchanged glances. The skepticism was clear on their faces, but Elon pressed on. He started with the workshops, the new initiative that had brought employees at every level into the decision-making process. He spoke about the success of these gatherings, where workers had contributed not only ideas to improve efficiency, but also solutions to the very production bottlenecks that had caused delays in the past. Elon, we appreciate the enthusiasm, one of the board members, Laura, said. But I need to be clear, we're here to discuss numbers. Culture is important, but can you show us a direct link between these initiatives and the improvement in production we need? Elon didn't flinch. Absolutely, he replied. Take the crisis we faced last week with the Model S production line. If it weren't for the feedback from employees who had participated in the workshops, people like Carla, who worked directly on the assembly line, there's no way we would have solved that problem so quickly. He clicked again, bringing up a short video of employees working together during the emergency situation, rethinking processes on the fly, using creative problem-solving to get the assembly line back up and running faster than expected. The video was raw and unpolished, but it conveyed something powerful, a team working seamlessly, focused on results. We didn't just survive that crisis, Elon continued. We turned it into a win. We didn't have to rely on outdated systems or throw money at the problem. We worked together as a team, and the workers at the heart of that process were empowered to make decisions. This is the power of culture. This is why the workshops matter. The board watched in silence, and for a brief moment, the skepticism seemed to lift. Elon moved on to the next set of numbers. This time, it was the employee engagement data. Over the past few weeks, there had been an unmistakable rise in worker satisfaction, with surveys showing that employees felt more valued, more involved in the company's mission, and more connected to Tesla's long-term goals. The results speak for themselves, Elon said, his voice calm but resolute. When employees feel like they're part of something bigger than just a job, they produce better. They're more committed. And ultimately, that's how we turn around the numbers. At the same time, he made sure to highlight the production boosts that were already taking place. While they weren't yet at the level Tesla needed, the pace of improvement was accelerating faster than expected. Then came the moment Elon had been dreading. The question he knew was coming. You've shown us the improvements, Elon, said Robert, the most vocal of the board members, and the one who had been most skeptical about the cultural shift. But let's be honest here, you're still behind schedule. The numbers may be improving, but not at the rate we need. What are you going to do to fix this and when? The room fell silent. Elon felt the weight of the question. This wasn't just about presenting good ideas anymore. It was about the survival of Tesla, his leadership, and his vision. He stood for a moment, allowing the silence to linger. Then, he spoke. I'm not going to sit here and promise that everything will be perfect tomorrow, but I will tell you this. I've seen a transformation. I've seen employees who were once disengaged now actively solving problems. I've seen engineers step up with ideas that are cutting production times in ways we hadn't imagined a few months ago. The numbers will keep improving because we've created a culture of innovation, of collaboration, and of ownership. And that is something that no other company has. Elon paused. I know we're not there yet, but I believe in the people in this room, and I believe in the people who are out there on the factory floor. Together, we're going to make this work. For a few moments, the room was still. Robert exchanged glances with the other board members, who seemed to be mulling over Elon's words. Then, finally, Laura spoke. All right, Elon, she said, her voice a little softer than before. We've seen the improvements. We're not there yet, but we're willing to give you the time to prove that this cultural shift can be sustainable and scalable. But we need results, and we need them fast. You have one more quarter to show us that Tesla is back on track. If you can do that, you'll have our full support. Elon exhaled, a sense of relief flooding his chest. It wasn't a resounding endorsement, but it was exactly what he needed, a second chance. We'll do it, Elon said, his voice unwavering. Thank you. As the meeting concluded, Elon stood up, feeling a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. He had just secured another quarter to turn things around, but he knew this was just the beginning. The real work had only just begun. Sarah walked over to him, a quiet smile on her face. That went well, she said. It did, Elon replied, though he couldn't shake the feeling that there was still so much left to do. But the real challenge is just starting. We've got a lot of work ahead of us. The moment the board meeting ended, Elon felt a brief sense of relief wash over him. He had bought Tesla more time, one more quarter to prove the turnaround wasn't just a fluke. But as the days passed, that relief began to give way to an ever-growing sense of urgency. The challenges were far from over. In fact, in many ways, they were just beginning. Tesla was under a microscope. The board had given him another shot, but that wasn't the same as believing in him completely. The pressure to deliver, to show that the cultural shift could translate into real, tangible results, felt suffocating. Elon was used to pressure, but this was different. Tesla's future, his future, depended on the next few months. Over the following weeks, Elon worked around the clock, diving deeper into every department, every production line, every conversation. He had always been known for his relentless work ethic, but now it felt even more personal. Every decision he made, every strategy he implemented, would be scrutinized. One of the most pressing concerns was the Model 3 production ramp-up. The car had become the lifeblood of Tesla's future, and the company's ability to hit the production targets was critical. The board's patience was growing thin, and while they had given him a temporary reprieve, everyone knew that another missed deadline could be catastrophic. Elon was determined to hit those targets, not just to keep the board at bay, but to prove to himself that his vision could work, that his gamble on shifting Tesla's culture could pay off. The factory floor had become his second home, and Elon was spending more and more time there, inspecting assembly lines, talking to workers, and getting their feedback. The energy on the floor had undeniably shifted since the workshops began. Employees were more engaged, more vocal, and, most importantly, they were starting to offer practical solutions to long-standing issues. One morning, as he walked through the Model 3 production line, Elon noticed something unusual. Carla, the worker who had helped fix the Model S production crisis, was deep in conversation with a group of engineers. Her face was flushed, and she was speaking with a passion Elon hadn't seen before. It wasn't just technical talk. It was about how to improve the assembly process, streamline workflows, and boost efficiency. Elon approached the group, raising an eyebrow. "What's going on here?" Carla turned to him, her eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. "Elon, we've been talking about how to increase throughput without sacrificing quality. We found a few things that could really make a difference." Elon was intrigued. "Like what?" She pointed to the assembly line. "There's this one step where we're seeing bottlenecks. If we rework the sequencing just a little, we can eliminate most of the delays we're seeing in the final stages. I know it sounds small, but I think it could really improve the overall efficiency." Elon smiled. This was it. This was the kind of innovation he had hoped to see when he had pushed for more employee involvement. "Show me what you've got," he said. Carla led him and a few engineers to the section of the line she was referring to. She outlined her idea, explaining how tweaking the timing and adjusting a few assembly steps could drastically reduce downtime and speed up the process. The team of engineers studied the proposal, and after some quick calculations, it was clear that Carla was onto something. It wasn't a revolutionary idea, but it was practical, grounded in the real-world experience of someone who spent hours every day working on the line. Elon could feel the excitement building inside him. This wasn't just about the numbers anymore. It was about empowering the people who truly knew the work. That evening, Elon met with Sarah to discuss the day's developments. He couldn't help but feel energized. For the first time in weeks, he had a glimmer of hope that Tesla's production issues could actually be solved. "We've got something here, Sarah," Elon said, pacing back and forth in his office. "If we implement Carla's idea, we can make a real dent in the production timeline. And it's coming from the people who are actually doing the work." Sarah nodded, her face breaking into a smile. "This is exactly what we've been talking about. The employees feel like they're part of the solution. They're invested in making Tesla better." Elon stopped pacing, his mind racing. "It's bigger than that, though. It's about culture. These employees aren't just coming to work anymore. They're solving problems. They're taking ownership of the future of this company. If we can keep this going, we can hit our numbers." But as he said those words, the harsh reality crept back into his mind. This wasn't going to be easy. A shift in culture could only do so much. Tesla needed immediate results. The next board meeting, The one where Elon would have to present the progress made over the past quarter was only weeks away. They were going to need a breakthrough, something that would prove the cultural shift wasn't just a side project but a fundamental change that could reshape Tesla from the inside out. The following days were a blur of meetings, strategy sessions, and more time spent on the production floor. Elon had Carla's idea put into action, but there were still obstacles to overcome. There were parts of the production line that had not yet been optimized, and the teams were struggling to meet some of the more aggressive goals set by the board. Elon found himself torn. On the one hand, he knew that Tesla's future was about much more than numbers. But on the other hand, if he didn't hit the production targets, the board would pull the rug out from under him. One evening, as Elon was reviewing the latest progress reports, he got a call from Robert, the board member who had been most vocal in his doubts about Elon's approach. "Elon, we've been reviewing the latest numbers," Robert said, his voice calm but firm. "You're still not where we need to be. The numbers are improving, but not at the pace we're expecting. What's going on?" Elon sighed, feeling the weight of the conversation pressing down on him. "I know, we're not there yet, but we're making progress. The changes we're making are real, and they're going to pay off. I just need more time." There was a long pause on the other end of the line before Robert finally spoke. "You're running out of time, Elon. You have one more quarter. That's it. If you don't show us significant improvement, we're going to have to make some tough decisions." The words hit like a punch to the gut. Elon knew the stakes were high, but hearing them so plainly from Robert made it all the more real. One more quarter. As the call ended, Elon stood in his office, staring at the cold, hard data on his screen. He knew he had to give everything he had. If he couldn't turn this around, it wouldn't just be a failure for Tesla. It would be the end of the dream he had worked so hard to build. There was no turning back now. The pressure is on, and Elon is racing against time to meet production targets and prove that the cultural shift at Tesla is more than just talk. The board is watching closely, and one more missed deadline could cost him everything. Can he pull it off in time? Or is it too late for Tesla to turn things around? Let us know what you think in the comments below. How would you handle the pressure if you were in Elon's shoes? Elon's world had become a blur of production data, employee feedback, and the looming shadow of the board's expectations. The relentless pressure to meet Tesla's goals was starting to take its toll. Every day, it felt like the stakes were higher, and the distance between Tesla's vision and its reality grew wider. Yet despite the setbacks and the mounting stress, Elon knew there was no turning back. Failure was not an option. It was late one evening when Elon received the call that would change everything. He was in his office, staring at the same spreadsheets that had consumed his days for weeks now. The factory was still behind on its production targets, and he could feel the weight of the upcoming quarterly review pressing down on him like a boulder. The phone rang, jolting him from his thoughts. It was Sarah. "Elon," her voice crackled through the line, laced with tension. "We've got a problem." Elon sat up, his heart rate quickening. "What happened?" "There's been a significant delay with the Model 3 production line," Sarah said. "A key supplier for the battery packs just notified us that their shipment will be delayed by 2 weeks. If we don't get those parts on time, we're not going to hit the numbers we promised." Elon's mind raced. 2 weeks. He had already pushed the team to the limit, and this delay would send everything crashing down. Tesla couldn't afford any more setbacks. They were already behind on their targets, and if they missed this deadline, the board would have no choice but to pull the plug. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to steady his breathing. "How can we fix it?" he asked, his voice tight with frustration. Sarah paused. "We're working on contingency plans, but it's going to be tight. I don't know if we can make up for the lost time, not without taking some serious risks." Elon exhaled sharply. This was the kind of situation he had always prided himself on handling, but tonight, it felt different. The stakes were too high, the margin for error too small. Tesla wasn't just any company. It was his dream, his vision for the future of the world. And if he failed, it wouldn't just be a setback. It would be the end of everything he had worked for. The next morning, Elon convened an emergency meeting in the war room. Sarah, Jared, Carla, and a handful of other key managers were there, their faces grim. Everyone knew how serious the situation was, and no one wanted to be the one to deliver bad news. We're in trouble, Elon started, pacing back and forth. The board's given us one more quarter. That's it. If we don't show them significant improvements in production, we're done. And now, we've got this delay with the supplier, which could push us even further behind. We need a solution, and we need it fast. Sarah spoke up. We've already put in a request for expedited shipping, but there's only so much we can do. Even if we get the parts early, it's not like we can just skip over the quality checks. If we rush it too much, we'll risk quality control issues. Elon ran his hand through his hair. I know, but we can't afford to wait. We need to pull in every resource we have. The factory's already stretched thin, but I need to know if we can make the timeline work, at least on the critical parts. Jared, always calm under pressure, spoke up next. We might be able to shift some resources from the Model S production line temporarily. It'll be tight, but it could buy us a few days. If the supplier comes through, we can use that time to mitigate some of the delays. Elon nodded. Okay, let's do that. But we're going to need more than just a few days. We need to get creative. Carla, I want you and your team to look into any other areas where we can optimize the assembly line. Anything that will give us an edge. Every second counts. Carla gave a determined nod. I'll pull in the production leads and see what we can find. We'll work through the night if we have to. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. The entire team was working around the clock, scrambling to fix problems as they arose. But the clock was unforgiving. Elon spent sleepless nights on the factory floor, overseeing every detail, talking to workers, trying to solve problems before they even happened. He could feel his body and mind starting to give out. He wasn't eating, barely sleeping, and the stress was beginning to wear on him. But he couldn't afford to slow down. Not now. Then, on the fourth day, the inevitable happened. Elon was in the middle of a strategy session when his phone buzzed. It was Sarah. Elon. Her voice was tight, strained. We've got another problem. The supplier has confirmed the delay. It's going to be at least 3 weeks before the parts arrive. We've exhausted every possible option for expedited shipping. Elon's heart sank. The dream he had been fighting for, his entire vision for Tesla, felt like it was slipping through his fingers. The delay meant they would miss the critical quarterly targets, and without those numbers, there was no way the board would continue to support him. The pressure was unbearable. He stood up abruptly, startling the room. We have to move forward, he said, his voice surprisingly calm. We're not going to let this setback define us. We're going to push harder. We need to find a way to get those parts, even if we have to create them ourselves. The room fell silent. No one knew what Elon meant by that, but he was already pacing, his mind racing. If we can't get the parts in time, then we build our own, Elon said, his eyes narrowing with determination. I'm not going to let this company fail because of one delay. The next few days were filled with chaos as the team scrambled to put Elon's audacious plan into motion. They pulled in engineers, designers, and even some of the top production workers to come up with alternative solutions for the missing parts. It was risky, expensive, and unorthodox, but it was the only chance they had left. As the days passed, Elon's exhaustion only grew. His body was worn out, his nerves frayed, but there was no room for doubt. He had always pushed his team hard, demanding their best, but this time he was pushing them harder than ever before, and himself even more so. Then, on the 7th night, something finally broke. Elon was at the factory when one of the engineers came to him with urgent news. The parts they had started producing as a makeshift solution were ready to be tested. Let's see it, Elon said, trying to hide the fatigue in his voice. The team quickly assembled the parts and began running tests on them. The room was tense as the engineers ran their final checks, each test critical to the success of the plan. Minutes passed like hours, and finally, one of the engineers spoke up. It's working, Elon. We've got a viable solution. It's not perfect, but it'll get us through the next few weeks. Elon let out a breath he didn't even know he was holding. For the first time in days, he allowed himself a small moment of relief. But even as he took a brief victory, he knew the battle was far from over. The weeks following the emergency workaround were a blur. Elon had always been able to push through intense pressure, but this was different. The constant strain, the sleepless nights, and the unrelenting demands of the board were starting to show. His usual laser focus was beginning to waver, and the weight of the company's future was beginning to crush him. Tesla's makeshift solution had worked, but it was far from ideal. The parts they had rushed to produce weren't up to the usual standards, and while they kept the production line moving, there was no guarantee that they would hold up under the long-term demands of full-scale production. Elon knew that time was running out again. It was a cold Tuesday morning when Elon arrived at the factory. His eyes were bloodshot, his movements stiff, as though every part of his body was screaming for rest. But there was no time for that. As he walked through the factory floor, he noticed the familiar tension in the air. The workers were pushing themselves harder than ever, driven by the same pressure he was under. He saw Carla, who had become one of the most reliable leaders on the floor, talking to a group of engineers. They were huddled around a workbench, looking at a new set of components. "Carla," Elon said, approaching her, his voice hoarse. She turned and gave him a quick, tired smile. "Morning, Elon. We're just checking some new parts, making sure they'll work for the Model 3. Elon nodded, but he could see the exhaustion in her eyes. "How are we holding up? We on track for the quarter?" Carla hesitated for a moment before answering. "We're pushing hard, Elon, but we're running out of runway. We're making progress, but the delays with the parts were a huge setback. If we don't hit the targets this quarter, we might not get another chance." Her words hit harder than Elon expected. He knew it, of course. He knew the risks, the razor-thin margin Tesla was operating under. But hearing it from Carla, someone who had lived and breathed the work alongside him, made it feel more real. "We're not giving up," Elon said, more to himself than to her. "We can still make it happen." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity, but despite all the effort, the numbers weren't adding up. The quality of the parts they had rushed through production was starting to show cracks. There were inconsistencies in some of the assemblies, and while they weren't catastrophic, they were enough to throw off the production timeline. Elon spent every waking moment in the factory trying to make sense of what was happening. He was living on coffee and adrenaline, but even that wasn't enough to keep the cracks from widening. The higher-ups at Tesla, especially the board, were starting to notice. It was Thursday afternoon when Elon received another call from Robert, the board member who had been the most vocal about his concerns from the beginning. "Elon," Robert began, his voice calm but firm. "We need to talk." Elon's stomach sank. "What is it?" "We're reviewing the numbers again, and frankly, things aren't looking good. The delays, the production quality issues, it's adding up. You're not hitting the targets we set for this quarter, and if things don't improve drastically, we'll need to reconsider your position." Elon felt a cold chill run through him. The words were no surprise, but hearing them from Robert in such a cold, businesslike tone hit harder than he anticipated. "I understand, Robert," Elon replied, his voice steely, "but you need to understand this. We're not out of this yet. We're close. We just need more time to work out the kinks." Robert didn't hesitate. "You've had the time, Elon. We gave you the quarter. We're not extending that." Elon gritted his teeth, holding back the anger that surged within him. "I'll get it done. You'll see. I won't fail." The line went silent for a moment before Robert spoke again, softer this time. "I hope so. We're all rooting for you, Elon. But if this doesn't turn around quickly, we'll have no choice." The call ended, and Elon sank into his chair, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on him. For the first time in his career, he was unsure of what to do next. His vision for Tesla, the mission to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy, was within reach, but it felt like it was slipping through his fingers. He knew the stakes better than anyone, but the pressure was beginning to chip away at his resolve. He stood up and walked toward the window, looking out over the factory floor. The hum of the assembly line, the sound of tools clanging, the buzz of constant movement, it was all so familiar. But now, it all felt like a distant echo. The dream that had once felt so certain was now clouded by doubt and uncertainty. That evening, Elon met with Sarah in his office. She was, like him, running on fumes. But there was something else in her eyes, something Elon hadn't seen in a long time. Fear. "Elon," Sarah said quietly, as she sat down across from him, "we need to talk about the future. The board is losing confidence, and if we don't hit those numbers this quarter, It's not just your position that's on the line. It's Tesla's future. I know, Elon replied, rubbing his temples. But I'm telling you, Sarah, we're close. Just a little more time, a little more focus. But you don't have time, Sarah interrupted, her voice shaky. We've been telling the board the same thing for months now. They want results. And if we don't give them those results, we're done. Elon met her eyes, and for the first time in a long while, he saw the doubt in her gaze. Sarah had always been his most loyal ally, the one who believed in him when no one else did. But now, even she was starting to question whether they could pull this off. He leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of their conversation settle heavily on his chest. For the first time, he wasn't sure if he could make it work. The dream that had driven him for so long, Tesla's future, his legacy, was at risk. And no matter how hard he tried, it felt like it was slipping beyond his grasp. The next morning, Elon walked through the factory again. The team was working harder than ever, but he knew the truth now. Time was running out. The parts that had been rushed into production weren't holding up as well as they had hoped, and the constant pressure was beginning to take a toll on morale. It was then that he saw Carla again. She was standing in the middle of the floor, her arms crossed, staring at the assembly line. There was a heavy sadness in her expression, one that matched the weight of the moment. Elon approached her, his voice quiet. "How are we doing?" Carla looked at him, her eyes tired but resolute. "We're giving it everything we've got, Elon, but I don't know if it's enough." There it was, the truth, spoken plainly. Tesla's future, his future, was hanging in the balance. And the worst part was that no amount of effort, no late nights or long hours, seemed to be enough to change the outcome. Elon Musk had always been a visionary, a man who thrived in the face of insurmountable odds. But as the days wore on and the pressure mounted, the cracks in his armor began to show. It wasn't just the board breathing down his neck or the constant struggle to meet production targets. It was the knowledge that everything he had built, every sleepless night, every sacrifice, was teetering on the edge of collapse. But Elon Musk was not the type to give up, not without a fight. The following week, Elon summoned the entire leadership team for an all-hands meeting. The room was packed, the air thick with tension. Sarah, Carla, Jared, and others sat at the long conference table, their faces drawn and tired, their eyes reflecting the weight of the situation. Elon stood at the head of the table, trying to mask the exhaustion that was evident in his every movement. "I'm sure you all know why we're here," he began, his voice steady but tinged with the weight of the moment. "We've got one shot at this, one last chance to turn this around. The board is ready to pull the plug, and if we don't hit our targets this quarter, it's over." The room fell silent. Every person in that room knew how dire things had become. They had all given everything they had to Tesla, to the mission of building a sustainable future, to Elon's vision of a better world. But now, even their loyalty was being tested. The fear was palpable. "We've been working nonstop, trying to solve the production delays and quality issues," Elon continued, his gaze sweeping over the room. "But it's clear that our current approach isn't going to cut it. We need to be bold. We need to go all in." Carla, who had always been a calm and rational voice, spoke up. "What do you have in mind, Elon? We've already stretched ourselves as far as we can go. There's nothing more we can do with the current resources." Elon paused, letting the weight of the question hang in the air. He had been up all night, thinking, strategizing, and ultimately, he had come to a conclusion. It was risky, but it was their only option. "I'm going to take a step back," Elon said, his voice quieter than usual. "I'm going undercover." The room went still. No one spoke for a moment. Everyone knew what that meant. Elon wasn't just going to delegate the job to someone else. He was going to immerse himself in the day-to-day operations of Tesla, working side by side with the employees, seeing firsthand where things were breaking down. "Undercover?" Sarah repeated, disbelief creeping into her voice. "Elon, you can't possibly." "I have to," Elon said firmly. "We need to understand where things are going wrong. We need to be in the trenches, not just making decisions from the top. If we want to fix this, I have to see it for myself." The plan was simple. Elon would blend in with the rest of the factory team. He would leave behind his usual high-profile role and go back to basics, working directly with the assembly line workers, engineers, and other staff. No one would know who he really was, not even the people who worked alongside him every day. It was a bold, unorthodox move, but Elon was no stranger to unconventional solutions. If he could get a true picture of the problems on the ground, maybe, just maybe, he could fix them. The next morning, Elon arrived at the factory before dawn, dressed in the same standard-issue blue jumpsuit the workers wore. His face was unshaven, his hair messy, and his demeanor that of someone who had just rolled out of bed, intentionally unremarkable. He walked past the security checkpoints without any fanfare, his heart racing with anticipation. It was strange, being in the factory in such an anonymous role. Normally, when Elon walked onto the production floor, people took notice. His presence alone commanded attention. But today, he was just another worker, one of many who were desperately trying to keep the wheels of the factory turning. Elon's first stop was the assembly line for the Model 3, where he was assigned to help with the final inspection of the vehicles before they moved onto the next phase of production. As he moved along the line, inspecting the vehicles, he noticed something immediately. Workers were frustrated. They were tired, their movements mechanical. There was no sense of urgency, no passion. The employees were going through the motions, doing their jobs, but not truly invested in what they were doing. He spent the next few hours in a blur of activity, moving from one part of the assembly line to another. It was like walking through a parallel universe. He saw firsthand the bottlenecks in the production process, the problems with equipment that had been pushed beyond their limits, and the quality issues that were plaguing their output. But more than that, he saw a lack of morale. The workers didn't believe in the mission anymore, and that was perhaps the most dangerous thing of all. At lunch, Elon sat at one of the factory's small break tables. He had a sandwich in front of him, but he wasn't really eating. Instead, he was listening to the conversations around him. He overheard a group of employees talking about the latest rumors, the delays, the cutbacks, the layoffs that were looming. It was clear that the fear of failure had taken root within the workforce. They were questioning whether Tesla could really pull through. "They're gonna shut us down, aren't they?" one of the workers said, his voice low. "I don't know," another replied. "Maybe. Seems like Elon's getting desperate. He's been all over the place lately, making crazy decisions." Elon winced. He wasn't surprised, but hearing it firsthand stung. It was one thing to hear about employee dissatisfaction from the higher-ups or the media. It was another to hear it from the people working on the front lines. By the end of the day, Elon had seen enough. The factory was in trouble, not just because of production delays or faulty parts, but because of the lack of belief in the mission. Tesla wasn't just a company. It was supposed to be a revolution, but somewhere along the way, that sense of purpose had been lost. That night, Elon walked back to his office, exhausted but determined. He had to act. He couldn't afford to lose this battle. Not now. Not when Tesla was so close to making a real difference in the world. He called a meeting for the next morning. The room was filled with the same leadership team, but this time, the mood was different. There was a quiet energy, a sense that Elon had seen something that no one else had. He stood before them, a man changed by what he had witnessed. "I've been working on the factory floor today," he said, his voice hard but resolute. "And I've seen the problem. It's not just about production lines or suppliers. It's about the people. We've lost sight of our mission, and that's what's holding us back. We need to reconnect with why we're here. We need to make every person in this building believe in what we're doing again." Elon paused, letting his words sink in. "I'm not asking for more hours. I'm asking for more heart. We've got one shot left, and we need to take it. Let's reignite the fire inside Tesla and show the world what we can do." The morning after Elon's impassioned speech, the atmosphere at Tesla's factory was different. The hum of the assembly line still echoed through the building, and the air was thick with the usual noise of machines and tools. But something had changed. Workers moved with a renewed sense of purpose, and there was a palpable energy that hadn't been there in weeks. Elon had reignited something inside them, perhaps not all at once, but enough to tip the scales. The word had gotten out. It wasn't just Elon Musk, the CEO, anymore. It was Elon Musk, the worker, the believer, the person who had rolled up his sleeves and put in the hours alongside them. And that shift in perception was exactly what Tesla needed. Elon had spent the night crafting a new plan. He knew that the problems weren't just production bottlenecks or faulty parts, though those certainly contributed. It was the company's very soul that had been fractured. The vision, once clear and unassailable, had become muddled in the face of constant setbacks and deadlines. Now, he needed to restore that vision, not just for the board or for the investors, but for the workers on the front lines. The next morning, Elon called an all-hands meeting on the factory floor, and this time, it wasn't just the leadership team. It was everyone. Every employee, from the engineers to the assembly line workers to the support staff, was invited. The factory floor was packed, the air thick with anticipation. Elon stood in front of them, dressed in the same factory jumpsuit he had worn the day before. "We've been through a lot," Elon began, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "And right now, I'm asking each and every one of you to remember why we're here. We're not just building cars. We're building the future. The world needs us to succeed. And I need you to believe that." The workers stood quietly, listening intently. For the first time in a long while, Elon wasn't just giving orders or directing strategy. He wasn't in the boardroom, surrounded by executives. He was one of them, someone who knew their struggles, who understood the stakes. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in before continuing. "This company is not going to fail," Elon said, his voice unwavering. "We're going to fix the problems, we're going to hit our targets, and we're going to prove to the world that Tesla is the future. But I can't do it alone. We need to work together, like we did in the beginning. Every part of this team matters. Every effort counts." The room was silent for a moment. Then, slowly, a few people began to clap. And before long, the entire factory was applauding, some workers even standing up in their enthusiasm. It wasn't just a show of support for Elon. It was a revival of their own belief in Tesla's mission. Carla and Jared, who had been skeptical at first about Elon's plan, watched from the sidelines. They could see it. There was a shift in the energy of the room, something they hadn't felt in months. Elon's willingness to get his hands dirty and join the team had created a ripple effect. It was as if the workers had seen a new side of their leader, one that wasn't just about the big picture but about the day-to-day struggles they faced. "This is it," Carla said quietly to Jared, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "This is what we needed." Jared nodded. He's always been the guy who leads by example. But this is different. This feels real. With the team re-energized and a clear focus on the mission, Elon called a meeting with the production team to address the immediate issues. It was time to implement the changes he'd been formulating. They needed to streamline processes, fix the faulty parts, and push harder than ever to meet their deadlines. But this time, the team wasn't going into it feeling like they were fighting a losing battle. They were in it together. Elon gathered Carla, Sarah, and Jared in his office that afternoon, the weight of their conversation hanging heavily in the air. "We've got one chance," Elon said, his voice grave. "The next 48 hours are crucial. We need to test every new part, every tweak we've made to the production line, and we need to do it fast. We can't afford any more delays. This is it, our last shot." Carla leaned forward, a determined look on her face. "We've got this, Elon. We've got the workers. They're with us. Let's make it happen." Jared added, "We'll pull together. We can't fail this time. The mission's too important." Elon nodded. "I know, and we will succeed. But we have to push harder than we ever have before. No more half measures." The next 48 hours were a blur of activity. The factory buzzed with urgency as everyone went all in, working tirelessly to get things on track. Elon was on the floor with the workers, not sitting in his office, but actively troubleshooting, listening, and fixing problems as they arose. He moved from station to station, inspecting parts, checking systems, and making sure that every process was aligned with the new vision he had set. And then, something remarkable happened. As the day wore on, and the workers saw the tangible results of their hard work, they began to believe. Parts that had once been faulty were now passing quality checks. Production bottlenecks that had delayed them for weeks were being cleared faster than anyone had anticipated. Elon had proven that not only could he lead, but he could also inspire a level of dedication that no one had thought possible in the face of such overwhelming odds. By the end of the second day, Elon called another all-hands meeting. This time, the mood was completely different. The workers were exhausted, but they were energized in a way that only comes from shared struggle and success. "Elon, we did it," Carla said, her face lighting up with pride as she stepped up to the podium beside him. "The new parts are coming in, the production line's on track, and we're ready to meet the targets. It's not perfect yet, but we're so much closer." Elon smiled, looking out at the tired but determined faces in front of him. "This is what happens when we all pull together," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "I've seen the results with my own eyes. We are back on track." For the first time in weeks, Elon felt the weight of the world lift from his shoulders. There were still hurdles to clear, still pieces to put together, but for the first time, he felt the clarity and confidence that had driven Tesla from the very beginning. The workers believed in Tesla again. They believed in him. And with that renewed belief, there was nothing they couldn't overcome. As the team celebrated their small but significant victory, Elon stood alone for a moment, looking out at the factory floor. The future of Tesla was uncertain, but in that moment, it felt as though they had turned the corner. The mission was still alive. The dream was still alive. The days following the breakthrough were a whirlwind. Elon Musk was no longer just the face of Tesla. He was the embodiment of its core principles. The factory floor, once filled with frustration and doubt, now buzzed with energy and purpose. Each day brought new victories, small improvements in production, higher morale, and a growing sense of unity among the workers. The mission was alive once more. But the hardest part was still ahead. Tesla had been pushed to the brink. The world had been watching, waiting for a sign that the company could make it through this crisis. The board was still skeptical, investors were nervous, and the media had been relentless in its scrutiny. But now, after days of hard work, Elon knew one thing for certain. There was no turning back. They had to succeed now, not just for the company, but for the future of sustainable energy. The quarterly deadline was looming. Elon stood in front of the production line, his eyes scanning the workers as they meticulously assembled the latest batch of Model 3s. It was the final push. Everything had to be perfect. Every vehicle needed to pass inspection without fail. He knew that the margin for error was slim, and the pressure was heavier than ever before. Carla, Sarah, and Jared were there with him, each of them overseeing different parts of the operation. But Elon couldn't help but feel a nagging sense of doubt. After everything they had done, after all the late nights and early mornings, would it be enough? He knew that the workers were giving everything they had. The entire factory had come together in a way that no one had ever expected, but the world outside was unforgiving. There was still no guarantee that they would meet their targets, and that uncertainty hung in the air like a heavy cloud. At 3 p.m., the final batch of vehicles for the quarter rolled off the production line. Elon had been pacing the floor, walking alongside the workers, making last-minute adjustments and offering words of encouragement. Now, as the last car made its way to the quality check station, he felt his pulse quicken. This was it, the moment that would decide everything. Carla stood next to him, her eyes fixed on the final inspection. "It's done, Elon," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "We've done everything we can." Elon didn't reply immediately. His mind was racing. He had seen so many setbacks over the past few months, so many close calls. And yet, this felt different. This felt like the culmination of everything they had worked for. But the fear was still there, gnawing at him. What if it wasn't enough? But then, as the final car passed the inspection line with no issues, Elon let out a long, steady breath. It was done. The target had been met. Hours later, Elon sat in the conference room with Carla, Jared, Sarah, and the rest of the leadership team. The results were in, and the numbers were better than anyone had dared to hope. Tesla had not only met its production targets for the quarter, but had exceeded them. The Model 3s were rolling off the line at a pace that no one had thought possible just a few short days ago. The board had been notified. Investors were beginning to take notice again. Tesla had not only survived, it had triumphed. But the victory was bittersweet. "We did it," Elon said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "We really did it." The room erupted into applause, but it was tempered by the quiet realization that they had come so close to losing it all. It wasn't just about meeting the production goals. It was about proving that Tesla could overcome anything. The stakes had never been higher, and they had delivered when it mattered most. But even as the team celebrated, Elon couldn't help but think back to the days when things were bleak, when the company was on the verge of collapse, when he had walked the factory floor and heard the doubts of the workers. It had been a hard-fought battle, and though they had won this round, the fight was far from over. Later that evening, as the team gathered for a small celebration in the break room, Elon found himself standing by the window, looking out over the factory grounds. The sunset cast a golden glow across the horizon, and for a brief moment, he allowed himself to relax. The pressure was finally off, at least for now. But as he gazed at the workers still hard at work, putting the finishing touches on the last few vehicles for the day, Elon knew that this was only the beginning. Tesla had fought for survival, but now it had to evolve. The world wasn't going to stop demanding more from them. The competition was fierce, and the pressure would never truly lift. But that's what made the mission so meaningful. The world needed Tesla, not just to succeed, but to lead. He turned back toward the team, who were laughing and clinking glasses. They had earned this moment, but tomorrow they would be back at it, ready to face whatever new challenge came their way. Because for Elon Musk and the team at Tesla, the mission was never finished. It was a journey that would take them to places they hadn't even imagined yet. The next morning, the board meeting was scheduled. The mood was cautious but optimistic. The results had been delivered, and Tesla was poised to begin its next phase of growth. Elon stood at the head of the table, his confidence back. He had survived the storm and come out stronger on the other side. As the board members filtered in, Elon exchanged glances with Carla, Jared, and Sarah. They had been through so much together, through the darkest moments and the brightest triumphs. And now, it was time to move forward. With the support of the team, he was ready to take Tesla to new heights. The meeting began, and Elon wasted no time in setting the tone. We've hit our targets. We've exceeded expectations. But this is just the beginning, he said firmly. We're not just building cars, we're building the future. And that future starts now. In the following weeks, the world took notice. Tesla's stock price soared, investors lined up, and the company's reputation was restored. But beyond the financial success and the press coverage, what mattered most to Elon was the renewal of faith. Faith in the vision, faith in the mission, and most importantly, faith in the people who had helped him get there. The journey had been painful, and the road ahead was still uncertain. But for Elon Musk, there was no going back. The dream of a sustainable future was more alive than ever. And with the lessons learned from the toughest battle of his career, Elon knew that Tesla would not only survive, it would thrive. Elon Musk and his team faced their greatest challenge yet, and together, they proved that the impossible was possible. But the journey is far from over. What do you think is next for Elon and Tesla? How do you think they will continue to lead the charge in sustainable energy and electric vehicles? Share your thoughts in the comments below.